Mhm. Zylo, can you hear us on the speech? Cool. 1 gigawatt, as I said before, it's a ballpark figure for how much a nuclear reactor or a decent coal power station would produce, though of course things vary. As the largest coal station in the UK is Drax, which produces 4 gigawatts. The UK, country of 65 million, on a winter's day uses 40, maybe 50 most gigawatts of electricity. So it is a substantial amount. I actually have the figures for how much it would cost using US retail energy costs in here somewhere. Here. If in the US, an average kilowatt hour, which is 1 kilowatt of electricity for 1 hour, costs 10.28 cents, and assuming we've averaged the power used throughout the year. Okay. Julius, was that to me or someone else? Anyway, basically, if you're sharing the energy costs between 8.538 million people, which is the population of New York, you'll be sharing an energy cost of almost $15 billion a year to run these systems. So that's $1,720 per person per year, which includes those not in work, children, the elderly, and those not living in the climate-controlled districts. Interestingly, when I was starting this, we were measuring the size of the districts, and someone was able to give me the area of Sahara Square based on the size of the climate wall. And it's fairly early on. We worked out that Sahara Square was 28 kilometers squared, and a kilometer square. No, I'm sorry. Not sure how much that is in imperial. Actually, I do. 2.6 kilometers square is equivalent to 1 mile square. So this is just over 10 miles square in area. So for reference, Manhattan is 60 kilometers square, so about twice the size of Sahara Square. The Bronx is 110 kilometers square, which is the size of the 3 climate control districts combined. So in terms of the size, the creators actually did a decent job, as you've got something which it's smaller than New York, but putting it up against New York, it wouldn't be stupidly small. So, and of course, the size of these areas and how many people live in them affects how much of a tax base you can draw upon, which is a major thing. As if there's a population density the same size as a human city, compared to, say, having a population density twice the size, it makes an enormous difference. The thing is, you could probably have an entire new thread estimating the population density of these districts based on how many of the population would be rodent sized and the open areas, but for now we're assuming that the population density is similar or the same to human cities. Everyone get that?
Yep, I'm following along. I realize that this one, it's a lot of text. I said this is definitely going to be a discussion where there's more math involved, so we'll let Mr. Norway go through and give us the overview, but then, yeah, we'll do our usual devolving into whatever we want to. So go ahead. Everything makes sense there. But basically, the amount of energy required for something like Zootopia is absolutely insane. It's ridiculous. And we're not even getting into the actual mechanics of how do you move heat around and something like that. But anyways, please continue.
Yeah, and you were saying it was ridiculous. the really ridiculous thing is that
Pardon me.
this is all calculated for a wind speed of 1 meter per second, and that's 2.23 miles per hour. So not a particularly high wind speed. You double the wind speed, you almost double the energy costs, as most of the energy is coming from air which you've heated up or cooled down, being blown away. And in particular, the moisture that you've removed from the air or created in that air being blown away and having to treat new air coming in. So it is ludicrous. Shall I go through my post and briefly
Yeah, go
explain
ahead.
the different bits?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yep, that will be great.
The first section I just talked about what the film showed. So you've got what you see on Judas Ride in, and as well as overviews here and there. The next part is a brief explanation of heat pumps and thermodynamics, as I believe the filmmakers did talk to people who looked at air conditioning and stuff, so they're using those principles to make this work. And the idea is very simple. Rather than generating heat by burning something or via electrical resistance, you're moving heat from one area to another, which uses less. Red Velvet Panda just came in. I saw Dalek, so I said enemy. I meant energy. Sorry, Hoovian reflex
Sorry.
there. Hoovian reflexes, bad. Sorry, just need to clear my throat. Sorry about that. Heat pumps and thermodynamics. My parents have been restoring houses, and the recent one they did, we used heat pumps as the heating system. And they're the same technology as air conditioning or in your fridge, moving energy. And as a bonus, you install heaters. You can reverse them in the summer to remove heat. And it's actually very efficient, as this was a big house they restored. They did put in a lot of insulation, but it cost about the same to heat in the depths of the English winter as my final year student house share cost to heat. And that house share was a Victorian terrace, warm on either side and shared by 4 people. So they're very efficient. Back on track. I'm assuming that you have a coefficient of performance of 3, which means that for 1 kilowatt hour of electricity you put in, you're able to move 3 from the cold to the hot, and so it essentially triples the efficiency and reduces the amount of energy you need by a third. So they were right in using that technology, as it helps significantly. Everyone on board?
Yep, I'm good.
Yeah. The next thing we needed to work out was district size, and who was it who worked it out? It was Empire Builder who worked out that who was able to figure out these. Sorry, it's the noises distracting me. Empire Builder was able to figure out the height of the climate wall, thus the length, and thus he was able to work out the area of Sahara Square, which, as we said before, is 28 kilometers squared, which is about 12 miles squared. I'm not sure what it is in acres
or hectares, anything like that. Yeah.
I know what it is in hectares. It is 100 hectares to 28 kilometers squared.
Okay.
So it's 2,800 hectares. And another user on the Discord, Zootopia, was able to give me a overview area of the city. And a lot of my work currently involves taking plans and measuring the areas of different components for buildings and stuff. So the areas of roofs, and I was able to bring that map on my lunch break and make a few quick measurements And from the size of Sahara Square, I was able to work out the area of Tundra Town and the area of the Rainforest. And if I remember, Tundra Town and Sahara Square were both about 40 to 48 kilometers squared, so bigger. Sahara Square is definitely the smallest of them. We're all aboard?
Oh, yep.
Okay, now the tricky part. How much would the climate modification require? So I assume that we were basing our city in an area similar to where Portland, Oregon is now, as a lot of fics have Zootopia on the west coast of America, as Take a Stand had it in California, Fox Point, which is one of my favourite fics, had it north of Seattle, between Seattle and Vancouver, and bit of an old thing there, which left in the post. I'll leave it there for now. So on average, Portland has a winter temperature of 4 degrees Celsius and a summer temperature of 20 degrees Celsius.
Very good.
Nice head cannon there. Sahara Square, I decided to base it off the climate of Phoenix, Arizona, as no one's going to argue that that isn't a desert. But at the same time, it has a relatively low average winter temperature. It gets down to 12 degrees Celsius there on average in the winter. I wasn't meaning that sarcastic or anything, Julius. Thank you. As Phoenix, Arizona, it gets relatively cool there in the winter, and most desert animals will have adapted to that. They'll be fine with it getting down to those temperatures in the winter, and it saves on energy.
Yeah, I might just jump in.
Pardon?
I was just going to say, do you mind if I just jump in very quickly? I just wanted to mention one thing, just for people that aren't aware. When we're dealing with the desert, everyone has this idea that it's, this scorching, absolutely torturous environment. But the thing is that sand actually doesn't hold heat very well. So what happens is during the day, everything gets ridiculously hot, 40, 50 degrees Celsius if you're in the direct sunlight in some of these areas, whether you're in the Gobi or the Sahara. But at night, it actually drops down to close to zero in some of those places, just because there's nothing to hold the heat, at least not for very long. So desert animals, generally, they can survive, they're okay with cold as long as it's not a protracted cold. So it's something like if it was like what our winter is in the northern or southern hemisphere, where you just have, it doesn't get above zero at all for months on end, that's where they run into trouble. But by and large, you have animals either they'll burrow into the sand during the day in order to avoid the worst of the heat, but also at night, they're going to try and use whatever heat they can in order to stay warm. But by and large, these environments, they still get quite cold. And it's actually why, if you're ever traveling there, you'll notice that people, even though you're out in the desert, they actually seem to have a lot of either bulky clothing or multiple things like blankets. And the effect is because it gets so cold in the evenings that you need to have a fire going, you need to have a tent or something like that to help you preserve body heat.
As I've spent time in Marrakesh and
yes.
buildings designed there, it's very thick walls, very tall, not a lot of light gets in. The advantage is it's able to maintain a relatively pleasant temperature in the middle of the day, and at night it balances out the temperature. Also, as well as the sand, the way I was taught, the main reason why it gets so cold in the desert at night is because you've got no cloud cover, so the heat radiates back out.
Additionally to that, you also you don't have any moisture in the air as well, at least not until morning when that temperature influx causes it to actually have condensation in there. But so basically, you've got nothing in the air to help it hold on to heat. Nothing in the the air, the ground, everything. So they are not designed, or just those environments, they aren't amiable towards having something like with the rainforest, where when you get into that area, of course, it's completely different. You have so much biomass that itself has a metabolism, as well as all of the humidity, the heat. So that means that in the jungle, it actually doesn't drop that very much. The day to night transition doesn't happen. But most people don't realize is you think, even though they're on the same equatorial plane as something like the Sahara Desert, the temperature in a jungle tends to not get anywhere near as high. Why? Because so little of the sunlight actually makes it all the way down to the ground. It's absorbed through multiple layers of canopy.
And talking about the Rainforest District next, I chose Manaus, Brazil as my baseline.
Nice.
And as you said there, the temperature pretty much 27 degrees Celsius all around.
Absolutely.
I think it'd be a lot worse than in the desert, though.
100%.
The humidity
80%
is
humidity.
80%.
Vegan South. I'll just say, vegan Southwestern Ontario. Welcome to my world. The Great Lakes. At the summertime, we're up at usually 80+%, 100% humidity is very common. That's why when we have the Humidex, which is a measurement of the temperature plus the effective humidity on something, because of course, if you have 100% humidity, you can sweat as much as you like. None of that's going to get into the air. So as a result, we often have a heat advisory because we'll have something that'll be 45 degrees Celsius with the Humidex factored in. And that's actually where it gets dangerous because heat stroke is a real big threat.
Yes. Going back to the desert thing and the desert animals, as I said before, I like Fox Point as a fic, and in that, Finnick, Nick, and Carmelita going to Kozlov's Winter Palace, and Finnick going up to, I think it was Angel was the Arctic Fox. He had as a girlfriend, and then they were complaining, "How do you manage with this cold?" He said, "It gets cold in the desert. I can deal with it, not like you."
Nice.
Anyway, and the final area leading on to Tundra Town, I'm going to assume. Oh yes, that's it. I remember that. I'm not going to spoil what is one of the funniest jokes in that fic, though. But yeah, suffice to say, they get drunk there.
Oh, nice.
Anyway, talking about Tundra Town, I think that's unique, as in the same way that you imagine the Sahara Square and the desert always being hot, you always imagine Tundra Town and the tundra always being cold. But in places it depends where the tundra you are, but even in places like Pudo Bay on the north coast of Alaska, well, you might have spots of snow surviving through the summer, you'll still have temperatures reaching 10 degrees Celsius up. You'll still have a thaw. And a lot of animals will like that warmth. They're adapted to the cold, but they don't like super cold.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's definitely one where Arctic wildlife is actually, this is a bit of an aside, once again, the evolutionary biologist in the room, but you take a look and so much of the life up in the high Arctic is geared to get the most out of those 1 or 2 months of above zero weather they're going to get every year. So basically, they take care of getting enough resources, going through and finding mates, raising their young, all within this tiny period of time, which is just kind of neat.
As my favourite thing is the Arctic foxes. What they do is they wait for the geese to come, who come up to make use of the growing grass, and they, at first, when the eggs are being laid, they eat a few eggs, but most of the eggs they bury in the ground, often in the permafrost, to preserve. Then when the chicks come, they eat the chicks and feed the chicks to their young. And then by the time the winter comes around, almost like squirrels, they've got a reserve of eggs which are in the ground. But through the midwinter, they're surviving off fat reserves and maybe a dead whale which has washed ashore. Well, in the same way, Venomite, in the same way that squirrels know to farm, it's less about farming, it's more about knowing how to preserve food when it's plentiful into the lake. Exactly, storage. And also, well, I say that most animals in the Arctic do like the warmth. I remember seeing things about polar bears. They're so well designed at keeping the warmth in that even when it's white out, they'll lay on the ground, in effect sunbathing, trying to lose some of the heat. They're so good at their design that. Anyway.
Oh no! And actually, go ahead. Sorry.
Anyway,
I was just going to say, it's an odd factoid. Polar bears are not white. Their hair is actually translucent. It's only because it's so thick that it appears white.
Cool fact.
They definitely emulated that in the movie, which was really awesome.
I know. Yeah. Go ahead.
That's it. We're serious about it. Hang on. When they were in the limo and they were grabbing the fur, I thought the fur was white there. It'd be
It's more, if you take a look at it, you can see there is actually some light transferring through it, so it's the translucent effect. So it's not clear. It is in no way clear, because let's face it, keratin doesn't come in a clear format. Usually it's going to have some type of pigmentation. But yes, they did actually make it so that light filters through polar bear fur.
That's why I figured Judy knew it was polar bear fur just by picking it up.
cool.
That would be a good giveaway.
Yeah. That's actually yeah. So as I was saying before, the Tundra Town we see might not actually be like the Tundra Town that we expect from Zootopia, as I think in the designs it was shown that snow and ice were used somewhat in architecture as well. And have any of you heard of Pykrete?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
As
Mythbusters, everybody.
Pardon? Mythbusters.
I said
yeah. Mythbusters. As for those unaware, during World War II, the UK had a steel shortage, and though we had a number of aircraft carriers, we had issues in terms of patrolling the areas where the convoys would move through. And the idea was, well, it was only one person who had an idea and a small group that tested it. You'd make an aircraft carrier out of ice, essentially a motorized iceberg, and fly your planes in and out of that, and use it to cover the gap between the USA and Iceland in order to provide cover against U-boats. But the trouble is, ice is brittle, ice snaps. And what they worked out you could do is use wood shavings or chippings, essentially sawdust, mix it in with the ice, and you'd create a substance which was almost stronger than concrete. And in one of my fics, I said that some of the buildings were built out of a similar composite material. And the gist of it is that I'm assuming that Tundra Town needs to be kept below 0 degrees Celsius, below freezing point all year round. Because if you're building buildings out of ice, you don't want them to melt much. At the same time, it's okay if, say, on certain days or in the peak of a summer afternoon, it perks above 0 degrees Celsius, as you'll have a large thermal mass, which you can use to keep things at a low temperature. Yes, Ben. I'll actually, I'll get a link here. Only stronger, as I'd assume that if you're keeping an area below 0 degrees Celsius all year round, it'd actually be a pretty useful material to make things out of, as just like concrete, you can cast it en bulk, and it would probably be cheaper and more environmentally friendly too. Anyway, so to sum up, Tundra Town, we're going to keep it below 0 degrees Celsius, so I'm going to assume we're calling it by 20 degrees Celsius all year round. Sahara Square, we want to keep it 15 degrees Celsius above local temperatures, which would put it in line with Phoenix, Arizona. And the Rainforest District, we need to heat it up by 7 degrees Celsius in summer and 23 degrees Celsius in winter to get it to the constant level that the Amazonian rainforest is in. Ice is awesome, it's one of the few, I think it's actually the only material which, when you cool it down, actually expands. As below 4 degrees Celsius, water, when you cool it down, begins expanding rather than contracting. And without that, we wouldn't have the polar ice caps. When ponds would freeze, they'd freeze from the bottom up, so you'd end up with a layer of fish on the top. So ice has some unique properties. Wait for you to type.
All right, so I did figure out how to get the audio to record everyone's voice, but unfortunately it wasn't recording for the beginning of this, so it's just starting up now. Basically, you make up a dummy account for on Discord, and then have that jump into the voice channel, and then it can record everything. So it's just that individual Richard Forrest, that is not real. That is me. But it's actually it's there so that they can be sitting in the chat, and that way the output I can record for everyone's talk.
Cool. If it's stupid and it works, it ain't stupid.
Oh, thank goodness. And Julius he's been recording this already. Excellent. Thank you very much.
And also, for those who are unaware, Enk has posted up his part for this, talking about communicable diseases. I'll definitely read through that later.
There's more to come. There's more to come.
Yeah, you can tell that.
Oh.
Need to heat or cool these districts up by the districts. Starting off with Tundra Town. Tundra Town's the easiest to work out, as cold air sinks. So what you can have is a pocket of cold air against the ground, and you're safe in the knowledge that by and large that'll stay there. And what I basically worked out was that, assuming at the top of the climate wall, the temperature is the same as the temperature outside, and at the bottom of the climate wall, the temperature is 20 degrees below whatever the top is. And in terms of thermal transfer from the bottom to the top, as you've got a relatively large area of air, it's a surprisingly low amount of energy you need for it. But the most energy actually comes in from replacing air which has been blown out. So, and the majority, in fact, the lion's share, actually more than the lion's share, about 99% of the energy you need to cool down Tundra Town isn't so much going to cooling down the air coming in from the outside, but it's condensing the water in that air. As you cool the air down, the amount of water it can carry reduces. And so, whereas you might have 50% humidity at one point, as you cool the air down, it reaches 100 point. And at that point, the energy you're putting in, rather than reducing the temperature of the air, goes to condensing the water. So, as you cool the air down, you've got to condense all the water in it. And if you're cooling it below zero, you've also got to turn it into snow, or else you'd have rain falling down. In the end, I worked out that you'd need, well, I've worked out at the bottom, and I'll say it then. Sahara Square and the Rainforest, meanwhile, I did a lot of things to try and work out how much energy those needed, and it's harder than Tundra Town because warm air rises. So you warm up your air, but whereas in Tundra Town it would sink and stay in place, in Sahara Square it would rise up and it would draw in more cooler air from the surroundings. And I think I linked to a picture in there, which I'll copy in now, and it's one of my new favourite pictures. It shows why in Game of Thrones, Team White Walker is at an advantage because fire versus snow. Fire isn't actually that good against snow. As for those unaware, that's Mount Erebus or Mount Erebus. Can't remember the exact name, but it's a stratovolcano in the Antarctic, one of about 5 lava lakes in the world. And as you can see there, you're not that far above a lava lake, and you've still got the snow clinging on. And that's because all the heat, rather than radiating out, it's rising straight up into the air. So you'll have cold air coming in over those ledges, being picked up, warmed up, and rising out.
Right. Actually,
yes,
just
that does work, but
if you throw the snow onto the lava, it's going to melt. Just to clarify, so when we're talking about how heat or energy at all, how it moves in the environment, is you have the major effect, which is the convective effect. That's where you actually have the air itself is moving. And of course, as was mentioned, hot air is going to rise. So what happens is you end up with this, what we call a convection flow, which is where cool air drops down, gets heated up by the lava, and then just goes straight up. Or if there's a crosswind, you get mixing and things like that. But for something like if you're in a vacuum, then the only way that heat can escape is through radiation. So it's basically infrared radiation, which then extends out in all directions. But if you consider that that energy decreases at a rate of the square of the distance that it's going, so very quickly you get this exponential drop-off of how much energy is available. And that's why most of that air is just because of the convective currents is just going straight up and out.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I tried lots of methods to try and work out how much energy you need to counteract this. As earlier I was trying to use models where you'd work the buoyancy of the warm air, how fast it would rise, the amount of friction of new air coming in, and it was an unworkable mess. One idea I had and I liked is you finding a formula for the urban heat island effect, which for those unaware, cities, towns, urban areas, they tend to be warmer than the surroundings for a number of reasons. You've got a lot of tarmac, which absorbs heat. You've got taller buildings, which keep warm air between them, and you've got human activity.
Actually, just to point out, Ian just posted one of his simulations looking at how the heat flow would affect. And we might get him just to chime in on that afterwards, but continue on. Sorry, just wanted to make note that it's posted in the general chat.
So I was able to find this site, I was able to find this formula for how much, which was used for predicting the urban heat island effect, and rearrange so you could input the amount of energy you'd need to create a certain urban heat island. Unfortunately, it was for peak urban heat island rather than average. And the difference there is that the urban heat island effect is most pronounced at night time and during the evening, as the city will have a lag time of cooling. It'll cool down slower than the surrounding country. So what happens is the urban heat island is at its most pronounced in the evening when the areas surrounding it have cooled down significantly and the town is still cooling down. And what this means is that, well, essentially, sadly, this formula wasn't much use for what I was trying to do. In the end, I decided to do a cop-out. I looked up a chart of US solar insolation, which is the amount of radiation from the sun hitting an area on average in a year. And I compared the area per meter square between Portland, Oregon, and the desert. And I multiplied that by the area you needed to heat up. And I got a rough figure. And I'm going to say now that it's probably it's probably almost certainly an underestimate, because because this will be a warm area surrounded by cold, and that cold will be going in there. And you said you were in Canada, and
yes,
yeah, well, Canada is probably on the same latitude as the UK. New York is probably on the same latitude as Spain, and in Europe, these areas are all significantly milder or significantly warmer than in the United States, and this is because of the Gulf Current, which is bringing warm water even, up from the Caribbean, up to the northwest of Europe, and warming those areas up. So, as well as solar insolation, you've got a whole manner of things to do with wind currents and ocean currents, which affect how warm your area is. And that's something I don't know how to model in and would have a major effect. So as I'm saying now, the figures I've got for these areas are probably underestimates, because I can't factor in the cooling effects from these things. As another thing to say is that Kamchatka, which is the big peninsula on the east of Russia, that's at the same latitude at the UK, but because of cold water coming down from the Arctic, it's significantly colder. Whereas if the ocean currents were different, it could have a mild climate and it would be like the United Kingdom, only with volcanoes. Instead, it's Russia with the volcanoes. So the one advantage you do have with Sahara Square is the fact that as you're heating air up and you don't need to add moisture to it as deserts are dry, you don't have to deal with evaporating large volumes of water or condensing large volumes of water. So it's significantly less energy use. It's actually probably the district which uses the least energy to warm up because you don't have to factor in water. My calculations for the thermal for how much it takes air to be warmed up do include latent water contained within the air, as you've got different figures for dry air and normal air. So just putting it out there. Everyone okay with that?
Yeah, and just make a note that this is all something that everything factors together because, as I said, you can have air that has 0% humidity, you can have air that's 100% humidity, and its thermal conductance changes depending on that, just because a lot of people, you don't realize what we call the specific heat capacity of water is. It takes a lot of energy relative to so many other materials out there, so many other elements, so many other compounds. Water takes a lot of heat to make it move either up or down a degree. So it takes a lot of energy to do that, which means that it can factor in immensely into these calculations.
Okay, Rainforest District next. I use the same kind of formula for the Sahara Square to work out how much energy needed. And then we get to the biggest energy use in the city, which is heating the water up to make sure the air is humid as it is in the jungle. And this is a massive energy use. And the trouble with the rainforest is, unlike the other districts which flow with the seasons, you need to warm it up by 23 degrees Celsius in winter, and you need to put in a huge amount of water into that air and continually replace all that is lost when it's blown away by the wind. So to sum up, Tundra Town, you only need 0.85. Sorry, let me just check these comments.
Sorry, I just was asking about some stuff that apparently I missed from the previous science discussion. Since
oh no, it's all right. I'm actually just going to put a link up for all the previous discussions, at least the Reddit threads for them. So I'll pin that up to the general chat once I get it all together.
Much appreciated. Dang it, I was actually always been meaning to ask about that one, and it turns out I missed it from last week. I was like,
oh no. Well, it wasn't last week. It was back in, I think, October was when we did it. It's been a while since we've done one of these. So yeah. But no, and also I'm completely open to actually, redoing any of these previous topics if people want. So just let me know.
Okay, I was going to reply to Venomheart, and he's saying doesn't take a long time to warm up or heat up water. It totally depends on the amount of energy you're putting into it. As you could strike a match and put it up against a bucket of water, and assuming there's no heat loss, it would take an incredibly long time to heat that water up to the temperature of the match and boil it off. But if you were, say, in the middle of the desert at 40 degrees Celsius and you had a tiny amount of water, that would warm up very quickly. It's entirely dependent on the amount of energy, the amount of power you're putting into that water. And at the same time, I think if you're cooking with water, if you're boiling vegetables and stuff, what you'll notice is it warms up, it starts boiling, and it stays boiling at that point. And if you put a thermometer in, you'll see that however high or low you turn the temperature, as long as it's still boiling, it will still be about 100 degrees Celsius, because all the energy you're putting in at that point isn't going to heating up the water. It's going down to breaking down the bonds and making the water evaporate into steam. So, that good?
Yep.
Rush through this. To sum up, at the bottom of my Reddit post, I've got the levels of raw heat injection or raw heat removal you need in different districts. Now, as you're using heat pumps, those aren't the true figures that you need. Heat pumps increase the efficiency. So at a bare minimum, you'll reduce those figures by a third. And so the next part goes into supplying this energy. And the first thing you see is that there's a mismatch, particularly in the winter. You need more energy than Tundra Town can supply to heat up the warm districts. And I did a little proof there showing that Zootopia could easily harness the water in the ocean. And there's an enormous, sorry, there's an enormous, sorry, getting my words mixed up. There's an enormous capacity of latent heat in the ocean. So using the ocean currents to continually replenish it, you can easily get most of the excess heat or dump most of the excess heat you need, depending on the month, from there. So you're using that to balance. And at the same time, while heat pumps do increase the efficiency by threefold, there is another way you could heat up the air, as if using a thermal power station, so coal, gas, oil, nuclear. These use a steam cycle, and what you have is a hot boiler or a hot nuclear reactor at 300 degrees, 500 degrees Celsius, and you have a cold sink, and you generate the electricity in effect by harnessing the flow of energy from the hot to the cold. So it's the same principle as the heat pumps, but in reverse. Rather than using energy to move heat from one place to another, you're gathering energy from moving heat from one place to another. And if you're using a thermal power station, you could be able to take that heat which is left over, which is often 60% or 66% of the total thermal energy you put into generating the electricity in the first place. And you could use that to heat the temperature of the warm districts up slightly, and that increases the efficiency further. As I say, I've got the calculations in there. And this is the principle that district heating works off, as I'm not sure about Eng in Canada, but in a lot of the Nordic countries and in a lot of Eastern Europe, you have district heating where you've got a power station and you use this waste heat, you pipe it around to apartments and to buildings, and you harness this waste heat to warm them up. So everyone on board?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the energy sources, cool. Ian Hunter's just posting things. I'm almost done, Ian Hunter. I'll get out. We can look at your things very shortly. In terms of the energy sources being used, I listed several. Using conventional electricity from the grid at business rates would be ruinously expensive. It would be $1,500 or $1,800 per person per year, assuming Zootopia has a population the size of New York. The first option to use is nuclear, and you're using the waste heat from the reactors to help the heating also. And you need 12.25 gigawatts of nuclear capacity. And basing this off a nuclear build the South Koreans have done in the United Arab Emirates, this would cost $30 billion in the last 60 years. So this works out to $128.5 per person per year. So about a tenth the price or less than that, which, depending on where you live, I'm not sure about local taxes, but that would begin to be the level of bearable. The next option is hydropower. And I think this is the most likely thing, as the current largest power station is the Three Gorges Dam in China, and it probably produces a bit less than the amount of energy that Zootopia's climate wall would need, but it costs $23 billion, and it'll last 100 years, it'll last longer than that. So on a cost per person, it'll be $26.87 per person per year, and that's to the level of pocket change. So that's easily affordable in terms of just the energy use. I think the most likely situation for Zootopia to have actually decided we've got loads of spare energy, let's build this giant wall and waste all this energy, is if they had a massive hydropower source which they tapped, and they had so much energy left over, and they practically could give it away. And what I've linked to on the post is the Grand Ginga scheme, which is on the Congo River, which is, in terms of flow, it's the second biggest river on the earth, only behind the Amazon. And very close to its source, it drops 90 meters down. So you've got an enormous potential energy which could be tapped. And in my view, it's going to be tapped in the future. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And this could produce 42 gigawatts of electricity on average throughout the year. So a continuous supply of 42 gigawatts. And that's enough to supply the United Kingdom.
Yep.
That's enough to supply a country. And if they built this, if they had a continent-sized river with an enormous flow, and near the mouth it did drop a significant distance, you'd probably build a dam there, even if you didn't know about electricity, in order to let ships get up and get into the continent to supply freight in and out. And they probably built this in the 1900s, back when it produced infinitely more electricity than they could ever need. And they decided, what on earth could we do with this? And some genius suggested the climate wall, and they thought, okay, we'll still have loads of electricity left over. That's the only situation in which I could see the climate wall being realistic, being something close to realistic. So that's the most realistic scenario.
Just as real. I was just saying, just a real world example, and this actually is really old technology, but I don't know how many people have ever seen Niagara Falls. So based on the border, Canada and the US. Right now, its output is about 4.9 gigawatts. That's what it's able to do on its own. There's actually even more capacity that's there, but this is actually, all that technology dates back from about the 50s to the 70s is when it was originally in place and replaced. So there would be much more efficient ways to do that now. And of course, if anybody's seen Niagara Falls, it's big. So that's a lot of energy. But the same idea of you can either have a lot of volume or you can have a lot of height. Either one is going to give you more potential energy.
From what I gather about Niagara Falls, that 4.2 gigawatts, it might be the amount if you funneled all the water in through turbines. But
exactly.
At the same time, there's limits to how much energy you want to deliver, as you don't want to drain the entirety of the pool down into your turbines and just leave a cliff.
The tourism industry might not like that. They kind of have built their whole economy around that.
It depends, but at the same time, what you might want to do in the future is, as you've got the difference between Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, maybe if you're willing to let one drop by 1 meter, one rise by 1 meter, fit some pumps so you're able to pump water up and down in order to give some balancing and energy storage. I'm not sure. It might be that might be a thing to do in the future. The only other viable technology I can see for powering all this is high altitude wind, which is in development at the moment. And the idea of this is you fly a kite up into the atmosphere where there's high wind speeds, you sail it around, generating lift until it gets to the end of its tether, and then you reel it back in and let it back out. And this has a number of advantages. Firstly, there's the fact that the energy you get from wind power. I actually haven't seen Big Hero 6. I'll have to check that out. The first thing to know about wind power is that the energy output increases with the cube of the wind speed. And up in the high atmosphere, where there's no trees, no hills to disrupt the airflow is consistent, it's very fast, and there's an enormous amount of energy there to tap. The other advantage of high altitude wind is you're building a kite, you're building a tether, and you're building a small ground, which uses very little energy to make, particularly when compared to a large wind turbine where you need a foundation, 100, 120 meter tower, you need the fans, and that's a different form of Julius has posted in a different form of high altitude wind power, which I think as which is a much lower potential. I'll link the one I'm thinking of later. The advantage of the high altitude wind power, well, there's two advantages to it. First is that at that level, when you're 2-3 kilometers up in the air, you're essentially producing base load power. You're producing power 24/7 all year round, few if any interruptions. And that, as you're optimizing your generators and you're optimizing your grid connection and you don't need storage, is a major advantage. The other advantage is it takes very little energy to build these kite generators, and that as I've linked to a blog where they work out that you get 500 times the energy out of one of these things that you get into making it, which is an enormous return on investment. And they work out that the levelized cost of the energy, which includes things such as the cost of finance, the cost of repair, the cost of all these things, comes down to $20 per megawatt hour, compared to, I think, the rate for commercial energy I worked out for the USA is 5 times that. So a big source of cheap electricity, and using that, it would be $318 per person per year. As I've said before, I've linked to some blogs on that thing, and I'll link in a video shortly. In terms of other technology, geothermal, this has come up a lot, and I think it's highly unlikely. The amount of energy you want to get to power this thing is almost equivalent to the amount of geothermal energy that's being produced all over the world. And you're not going to get that out, even if Zootopia is sitting on top of an extinct or dormant volcano, you're not going to get that out of that one mountain. Maybe even if it has a lava lake in it, I don't think you'd be able to get that amount of energy out. And in terms of solar and wind, in terms of solar, you need far more energy in the winter than in the summer. And solar's output is biased towards the summer rather than the winter, which in my view makes it, apart from maybe displacing some gas, it makes it very unreliable and in effect surplus to requirement in most northern countries. And wind, you can have an anticyclone, a high pressure system, which can knock out a continent's wind supply for a few days at a time, and the amount of storage you need to, well, back up your system, it would be completely unrealistic and ruinously expensive. The final things I'd like to say are, in terms of hidden infrastructure, I don't think that the climate wall will be, I think the climate wall is the tip of the iceberg in terms of infrastructure. If anything, I think there's probably underfloor heating and underfloor cooling in most districts. You might, in the rainforest, you might have trees pumping out warm air and steam, as if you're just pumping everything out via the climate wall, in Sahara Square particularly, that heat coming out, it'll rise straight up, and not far from the climate wall, it'll have little to no effect. Finally, in terms of better options, it'd be much cheaper to build a large greenhouse scenario, something like the Eden project, which I'll link to now, to cover the districts, as most of your energy use is linked to the wind coming in and blowing air out. And if you stop the wind loss, you make this much more reasonable. What might be even better is if you have buildings in rows or built around small pods, where inside is this warm or this cold environment, whereas outside it's normal, and that would reduce the energy use further. It'd look a lot less fun, but it would be more reliable. Finally, in terms of unforeseen consequences, pointing out that from the rainforest district, you're adding enough energy to create a thunderstorm every 6 days. And at the very least, downwind from the rainforest, you'd expect a lot of rainfall, and in the winter, maybe an enormous amount of snow. And at worst, you might have a tornado factory on your doorstep, which has the advantage of solving the bunny burrow population crisis. But anyway, that's most of what I'll put. I'll link the things I'll put now. And Ian Hunter, are you on voice chat, or as he can relay what he said?
Oops. Oh, no, he doesn't have voice chat, unfortunately.
Okay. I'm just going to post these things in, and maybe if you guys want to talk about it, I'll look up what he's posted and try and it was some help.
Oops.
Are you
Yeah, I'm just saying, you seem to be cutting out on the audio a little bit.
me or everyone else?
You were, it was just like we were getting it on echo, but it sounds fine now. Not sure what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I was hearing some feedback earlier. I've got a laptop microphone and that's it, I'm afraid.
Ah, okay.
Right, just posting a picture of the Eden Project, which is essentially a large greenhouse. Hang on, that's not working. Let me try and find a different image. Sorry, my Discord's being a bit of a bother, and these images aren't working for some reason. I'm not sure why. Hey, I've got it to work. So
Excellent.
what I'm just posting here is some pictures of the Eden Project, which I mentioned earlier. It's essentially two large greenhouses in the southwest of the United Kingdom. It's built in a former clay pit, and one of these holds a rainforest environment. One of them holds a hot, dry environment. So not desert, but maybe Sahara, maybe Mediterranean. I'm not sure about the exact scientific sign. I'm trying to get a image from inside.
Ah.
Got one. Mm-hmm. And for those who are interested about the high altitude wind, here's a link to a video about showing the type I was thinking about. I'll quickly get an image and post it up as well. Eng might have
Yes.
the link to that.
Sorry, what am I looking for?
Knobbly, just Knobbly wants the one about the diet.
Ah, hang on. I will post the link up here. I did pin it up at the top, but I'll just put it right here.
Was it one of the ones you posted earlier?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm reading through them slowly, trying to catch up. Mostly
No problem.
looking for parts pertaining to dietary supplementation and physiological adaptations based on the evolutions we see throughout Zootopia. My curiosity is based on a fic I'm working on, is that I want to know how their diets would be supplemented, considering I believe that they maintain less efficient caloric intakes than they would in their real life equivalents, such as we see Judy and Nick both weigh substantially more
than what the average animal would. Yes.
Yeah. So
all right, I just posted a direct link there, so that's the diet and nutrition one. So it's in I've just put it there. It's also pinned at the top. But absolutely, it's something where, in particular, this is where it's something that I go into in some detail, both in that as well as there's a section there in the lost causes of broken dreams, the story. But basically, it would actually be easier for herbivores, as it would, to adopt some elements of a more omnivorous diet than it would be for so many of the carnivores, just because, by and large, carnivores don't have any of the enzymes required to break down any of those long chain, basically the sucrose molecules, cellulose, hemicellulose. These are just long chains of sugars. We don't have the enzymes to break them down effectively. So what you would end up with is, for instance, predator species of Zootopia would probably require a lot of processed protein, or what we've talked about before, the idea of bugs, birds, and fish, because that's going to be their major protein source. Now, if you do go through with process, so things like cooking the food, it does release quite a bit of the nutrients there. But in the long term, what you're going to end up having to do is predators in Zootopia are probably making use of some type of supplementation, whether it be in the form of either like protein shakes on a daily basis, be able to add in additional amino acids like taurine for foxes and felines that aren't able to produce it on their own. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of information there. But the general thing is, it is possible, but it would actually be something that would have to be dealt with on basically the individual species would probably be responsible for knowing what they need and tailoring their diet to it. So the whole idea of like what we have of the now kind of defunct food pyramid, that wouldn't exist in Zootopia for the whole population because it wouldn't work for the whole population. There would actually have to be various ones, and it would almost be on a species by species or even larger genus when we're dealing with families. So all the felines would use one, all the canids would use another, that type of idea.
Yep. I was thinking, Ian Hunter, if you're able to repost the images you posted up, we'll be able to have a look at them now. Is that okay? Sorry about you having to do this. It's
It's okay. As I said, this is only the second time we've done this with a live chat, so there's going to be hiccups. Hopefully, we'll get better at this as we go on. But this has actually been really good so far. I mean, there's a lot of information, and I'd just like to thank everyone, in particular everyone who's volunteered to help with this. But if you do have any topics that you would like to see covered in these, just send me a message, and I'll try and make it work. As I said, I'm a molecular biologist. My background's more in evolutionary biology and biochemistry. But something like this is just fun just to think about. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 As Ian Hunter says, if you go up to the pin thing, all his posts are pinned. So
perfect.
I'm going to look at the top one first. The one. Okay, this is for the upper bounds, what I believe.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm. So this is looking at an 8 meters per second exhaust with a 1 meter per second wind speed. So, and showing 3 temperatures. So, Ian, is one side Sahara Square, one side Tundra Town? Could you explain this to us, please? Mm-hmm. Right, let me just link back. Discord's not jumping me back for some reason. Come on.
Oh, the joys of being live to air.
I've got to try and find where you posted that. Sorry about this. I'm trying to get back to where he pinned it. The trouble is I click on it and the pin thing disappears, but it's not jumping me to there.
Fix it in post.
Ian, would you be able to repost that one back to the front, please?
Okay, just give me a second here.
Sorry about that. I'm getting some feedback and it confuses me.
No, where did it go? So the upper bounds, that's what we want there. Just trying to grab the right one here. Okay. The upper bounds, what you have there. All right, I'm going to now just repost this. There we go.
Thanks. Sorry about that. As I said, I tried.
Nope.
As I said before,
okay.
I clicked once, it jumped me to there, but when I tried to do that again, it didn't work.
No problem.
So, I'm not sure what's going on. Is the climate wall in line with us? I mean, going vertical on this?
I believe so. That would be my guess on this. I'm just trying to take a look.
There's a scale on the bottom, but
oops, go back here. So yeah, it looks like the orange is at the 26-degree temperature, yellow is 20 degrees, and green is 14 degrees. So he's basically showing what the upper boundary for each of these is based on the height of the climate wall.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I've got no idea what that actually is. Well, I know where I've got. Yeah, it's just the scale's not there. This next one's much more interesting because it's showing. Can you zoom in? So I think what it's showing is that the climate wall is in the middle. And what you can see is a lot of hot air going up from the climate wall, convecting around and condensing back down. So you've got a loop on the left, whereas on the right, I think there's a tiny sliver of blue down in the bottom, which I think is Tundra Town. I'm not sure. Could you confirm that, Ian?
That would be a yes.
The new one you've posted, that makes a lot more sense, as it's showing the climate wall going down the middle, and you've got Sahara Square on the left and Tundra Town on the right. Shingeki no Refrigeration.
Jeez.
So it's showing there on the left is, I think you've got the warm area hugging the climate wall, which is the hottest
and that
area.
makes sense.
And I think to the left, is that the warm air rising? As I'm not sure how these axes work. Is it the as it comes towards you, it shows how things evolve over.
Yeah, let's also not forget that. So this is basically, if you're looking at, we have a big heat source in the center of this. It's basically your heat sink. And what it's doing is it's moving heat around. So the idea is that we're looking at the different airflows on either side of the wall. And basically, because they're going to be mixing, there's going to be things going on. The idea is we want to create a boundary layer. We want to create a way so that, because otherwise you're just going to end up with the air mixing and you're not going to get that effect. Or even worse, if you have something like, let's say, not so much Sahara Square, but let's say like the Rainforest district abutting against something like Tundra Town. What is going to be the effect of that air mixing? Does anybody know?
Well, it depends which way it goes. If it's the Rainforest district going into Tundra Town, you either get a lot of rain or a lot of snow.
Bingo, you are going to get a whole lot of precipitation. Inside.
Oh, hello?
Oh, sorry, my microphone fell out. There we go, it's back. There we are.
Cool. Normal service has been resumed.
All right.
So Ian, in the last one you've posted, what speed? Sorry, hang on, let me get the see if you've said this. What speed is the air being blown out of the climate wall at? But what I was asking was, what speed is the climate wall blowing the air out at? Is it blowing it fast, or is it blowing it slow, or? Cool, so that's a decent breeze coming out either way. I know you've done a lot of work on this, and I don't want to sound like I'm not appreciative, or picky. Or what would have been useful is if we could have seen the surface to see, say, with Sahara Square, is that air rising up away from it, or?
Surface temps. Yes, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah.
Because once again, we're not only dealing with the climate wall itself. We need to remember that these environments as a whole are also going to be contributing. Okay, let me put it this way. If it was just the climate wall, can anybody think of what would be a major problem for individuals in something like Sahara Square?
Well, I mean, firstly, on the train going into Zootopia, Julie would have come out of the other side into Tundra Town roasted.
Yeah, slightly cooked. The amount of energy that we're talking about putting out, it's a lot. You know, we're talking that if this was all just radiative energy, that they're just blowing really hot air, well, yeah, you could basically use that as just a giant barbecue wall. And it would not be the way I think of these. So that's why the heat has to be spread over the whole district. You have the climate walls are there more to create almost a buffer and to supplement, but a lot of the individual temperatures have to be maintained over the whole district. With something like the Rainforest District...
Iceberg
go ahead.
principle. I was going to say
Precisely.
iceberg principle.
Exactly, very much so. And it is something like, actually, the easiest one to consider is actually Rainforest District. Once again, high humidity environment, lots of canopy cover. It's going to hold the heat far better than anybody else. With both Tundra Town and Sahara Square, they're the extremes, but they're both kind of dry heat and a dry cold. So for them, they are the harder ones to maintain, but they're also the more extreme. So you can actually just pump more energy into the system. Ah, there we go. Thank you, Ian.
Cool. Well, for those two, for Sahara Square, as I wrote out before, the advantage of Sahara Square is you don't have to work or deal with the humidity. You just warm the air up, and as you warm the air up, its carrying capacity increases. The amount of water in it stays the same, so the humidity reduces. You don't have to think about that. It handles itself. Whereas with Tundra Town, you've got to cool down all the water in new air coming in. And in the Rainforest District, you've got to heat up air to keep the humidity or raise the humidity higher. So in terms of energy use, Sahara Square, for that reason, uses the least energy, even though you're using an enormous amount of energy to convection. It's just rising up. Tundra Town uses the next largest amount, mainly due to having to condense and cool all the new moisture coming in. But it has the advantage that as cold air sinks, you're able to maintain a pocket of cold air onto it. Rainforest District is the worst, as you've got warm air rising, and you've got to add for some reason I can't pronounce enormous when going fast. You have to put in a very, very large amount of extra water into the air in the Rainforest District, and you're losing substantial amounts of it very quickly due to wind, due to convection. So, yeah. What's the scale? Can you tell me the scale at the bottom? Is it 1.4, 1.5 kilometers, or as it's times 20? It's times 10 or times 20 something meters squared, but I can't make that out at this scale, I'm afraid. Thanks very much. So in the bottom scale, it's saying 10 to the power of 4 meters, and that's 10, 100, 1,000. So it's actually it's going, it says 0.2, 0.3, but that's actually 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers. So roughly from the length of the climate wall simulated using the length of my finger as a ruler, that's about 5 kilometers of climate wall simulated. And I'm guessing the wind's coming from the north and blowing down. And what it's showing there is that you get it warmed up to 20-25 degrees Celsius for a large area, blown down wind. So that's raising it by 5 degrees. But Sahara Square, if you take the length of the climate wall simulated and use that as one of the sides of the square, that will give you the rough area. So what it's showing is that a very small strip next to the climate wall is being heated up to the correct temperature. And beyond that, it's slightly warmer than the surrounding areas, but I wouldn't say it's desert. It might be hot Mediterranean or very southern Californian, but not desert.
Right. And for something like, oh no, go ahead. My mistake.
And on the other side, we've Tundra Town, as it shows there. It's nice and cold in those areas, but going away, things warm up above 0 degrees Celsius quite a bit. So it's showing that, again, the wind is the big factor in this.
Yeah.
The wind blows away all the work you do.
Yeah, basically. And this is something also that we can take a look at that and almost view it as the same idea how in modern society, you know, what they always say, whenever you're looking for a place to live, it's location, location, location. The closer you are to this climate wall, the more stable your temperature is going to be. So if you think about that, you almost create an environment where the more expensive buildings are probably going to be located somewhere like that, at least for the individuals, for the species that are tailored towards those environments, particularly the desert versus the Arctic individuals. So you can think of social stratas where this would make sense. Additionally, of course, you could have essentially additional heaters or coolers in place in order to moderate this and create a more stable environment. But once again, that's just going to add to the cost and to the overall energy use. But as we've seen already, the energy thing is something where you can get it big enough. It just depends on how many resources you want to throw at this. We're once again in an infinite money situation, infinite resources. It's not a problem, but we do see that once again, anytime you move away from where you're inputting energy into a system, it gets lower and lower. And as I said, as you go out distance-wise, the energy, of course, it gets lost at the squared rate of the distance. So basically, if you're 1 foot out, you're only going to be, you're at basically 1. If you go 2 feet out, now suddenly you're 4. And then you're up going to be 9, 16. It keeps on going on and on and on, where it's just basically a square where you get less and less energy is available from that source.
And also, I was going to just comment that the amount of energy you're putting into this and the amount of energy you need to make this viable, this is probably a society where no one gets behind on energy bills, where this is essentially, it's too cheap to meter. So
exactly,
you won't have people falling behind on electricity bills. It'd probably be cheap enough to take the electricity, get carbon dioxide from the air, create synthetic diesel, and use that to run all your vehicles.
That's actually that's a very good point. Yeah. And also,
in terms of energy, this would be post-scarcity in this world. As soon as the energy price begins to rise, you would likely have people coming along and creating greenhouses and stuff to substantially reduce the energy the climate wall needed. As if you want to save energy, it's the number one thing to deal with, and there are some simple ways to significantly reduce the energy you need. Nice thing Ian Hunter has just put in there, showing that counterfactually to what we've seen, most of Sahara Square stuff is a long way away from the climate wall.
Yeah.
There's actually a buffer around it. So,
however, that's also by an oasis. So once again, you do have a mitigating factor where basically by applying extra heat into that body of water itself, you could easily help to mitigate some of the temperature issues.
So it'd probably be like warm bath water there.
Precisely, yeah.
And being the evolutionary biologist and person who knows all the diseases, would that have any significant effect? Would you be having malaria around there, or?
There would have to be an enormous amount of effort put into it. The main thing with Zootopia is the public officials, basically all the health agencies, they would have to be looking for, and this is something where I've added into the Reddit thread. My part in this talk is more on the sociological side of things and the epidemiology, because Zootopia is a nightmare from a disease perspective. Let's just be perfectly honest here. You have hundreds of different species all commingling together in close environments. And what that does is it creates an environment where you can have diseases jumping species. So you have the same thing would happen with the avian flu, where we had that recently, where you have diseases can jump from a species that has lived in for just millennia. They've been growing together. The molecular arms race, as it were, of the pathogen trying to find ways to get around the host defenses. All of these are actually been going on for a lot of time, but then suddenly you get a mutation that enables that disease to infect something else. And that species has no natural immunity. And this is where you could have things come in and just wipe out entire swaths of the population. So how do you speed up that process of jumping species? Well, you have a bunch of species living in close together, but what's the other one? You have a bunch of disparate environments that are actually, once again, very close together. And it's not just the idea of where these two climates meet and they mix, but let's think about this. You have a society here in Zootopia where somebody could, within 15 minutes, go from a desert environment to a winter environment. And that's a huge difference in everything that's in there. So all you need is an opportunistic pathogen that, once again, if it manages to get a mutation that allows it to infect a host, or something that's really weird is if you think of normally, when we think of diseases evolving to become more virulent, normally they become more dangerous to the species that they're already in. But think about this. You have something like a flu virus, and it's actually in a temperate environment. So let's just say like Savannah Central, something like that, what we would consider kind of an average temperature environment. Well, a mutation occurs, and it actually makes it so that it doesn't do as well in moderate temperatures. It actually does really well in hot temperatures. Well, suddenly, that pathogen is no longer adapted towards life in Sahara or in Sahara Square. But if somebody were to take that over to Sahara Square, even though that pathogen in the environment where it originally evolved is less efficient, it can be more efficient in another environment. We're actually opening up opportunities and niches where pathogens can evolve in order to fit into these things. And by having this constant flux and mixing going on, it becomes a nightmare where you would have to have, my thought is, public health officials would probably be looking for any type of flare-up, and in particular also using newer techniques in order to very rapidly figure out what's changed so that they can say, oh crap, we need to lock down this specific area, and we would need to actually be, they would be looking for this and be ready to act at a moment's notice. Let's see, Julius just asked here, yeah, a disease like rabies, actually rabies is not a bad one. Why? Because you can vaccinate for it. And this is something where, something like along the lines of rabies, I would imagine that that virus has actually probably been kicked. Because what's the reason why we still have rabies now? It's the wild populations that maintain it. Because that's something that's in there. Whether you're dealing, depending where you are in the world, it could be either raccoons, foxes, something like that that's carrying the disease. Well, in Zootopia, those host species are sentient. The odds are something like rabies would have been wiped out long ago because you could actually kill off or remove all of the host species. It's the same thing that we did, and that's why, whenever we talk about smallpox, that thing was a disease that ravaged humanity for millennia. Why were we able to beat it? Because it only had one host, humans. Once we were able to inoculate and prevent its infection, it died out. Same thing could happen with something like Zootopia, at least for viruses that are very stable. So think things like, as I said, rabies, anything that's a DNA-based virus, so even like chickenpox, all of those, where these are stable viruses, not much changes in them over time. Those ones you can find a linchpin and you can knock it out. Something like the flu, because it's so variable, that's way more difficult.
I was also going to say that I think only 2 diseases have been wiped out so far. I think the second one, it was a type of worm which affected cattle, or was it a disease?
Yeah, it was. I want to say it's like schistosomonas, but I don't remember off the top of my head. But yes, we've only. In reality, most pathogens, they exist in multiple hosts. But what's neat is, in a lot of these cases, of course, when we're dealing with a lot of these wild populations, the pathogen doesn't actually hurt the host. Because, once again, when you're dealing with this from an evolutionary perspective, having your host die is not a good thing. Because when the host dies, you can't use it to make more of yourself. So for the pathogen standpoint, the ideal situation is you want to create a situation where your host is infected, it's reproducing the pathogen inside of its body, but it doesn't die. That way it just keeps on spreading. That's the ideal. It's only when something occurs where the virulence becomes either more aggressive, a new symptom develops, or it weakens the host's immune system that another disease can come in and take over. Something like, well, obviously the most obvious one of this is like HIV and AIDS, where the virus itself, it's replicating rapidly. And it's not actually AIDS, the HIV virus, that kills the host. It's the infections that come after the fact. Because the host's immune system is weakened, they're able to slip their way in. And normally a disease that our immune system will be able to fight off easily, suddenly that becomes a life-threatening situation because the host just doesn't have an immune system. And with Zootopia, same idea. So there will be some things like, I would imagine quite a few of the parasite diseases that exist now within species, things like rabies, those probably have already been wiped out. Like rabies, I could honestly see being Zootopia's smallpox. It was one that it would have been able to ravage a society, but it's one that could easily be fixed as soon as you have every species that's a possible host is able to be inoculated.
But in terms of rabies, I'm suspecting that, sorry, just some feedback, it throws you off. With rabies, people would know that they would have it and they'd be able to...
They could quarantine the individuals involved, yeah.
They'd likely give them a mercy kill.
I was going to say, yes, it's kind of a... We already know Disney has no problem going the Old Yeller route.
I was going to say two other diseases which we're very close to wiping out. I think one's polio.
Yes, unfortunately.
It's only down to a few countries, and the other one is gun, which. Well, fortunately, it's down to only a few countries.
I know, it's still unfortunate.
It's still in those.
Yep.
And the other one is guinea worm or guinea worm. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And that's a much more symbiotic one. It
exactly.
goes through the sole of your foot. It grows in there. It is symbiotic, like you said, but it's nasty and it's painful, and they're trying to remove it.
Yeah. Well, that's actually, once again, treating the diseases, whatever, just so everybody understands, we're dealing with pathogens. Generally, of course, we're talking about is either bacteria, viruses, or fungi. Now, the first two, because those are not eukaryotic, when we're dealing with life, two big groups are eukaryotic and prokaryotic. Eukaryotic are the complex organisms, the things that have organelles inside their cells. So they actually have things like nuclei, endoplasmic reticulum. In the case of mammals or higher species, you also have mitochondria, which are in there being just little engines that power the cell. Versus a prokaryote, which is bacteria, where basically you don't have organelles, you have all of the cellular contents are just in the cytoplasm, that liquid inside of the cell, and it's all just basically free-flowing. Because fungi
and viruses aren't living creatures.
Viruses are that special case. They are technically alive when they're replicating. Otherwise, they're generally dormant. So they have
the other one are prions, which are actually almost like infectious bugs in protein, and
prions are infectious proteins. They are ones. Yeah, prions are a special case. Once again, they're much closer to a virus in that by themselves they are utterly incapable of reproducing. They need to have other proteins in the host that they can modify to match themselves. And unfortunately, this is a case where that's why, since they're so simple, they're hard to get rid of. But just once again, with dealing with treating these diseases, bacteria and viruses generally easier to treat because they're not eukaryotic cells. When we get into parasites, as fungi, those are both eukaryotes. So that means that a lot of anything that we would use to try and kill them is also going to be toxic to our own cells. So it becomes basically a balancing act of being able to match what disease you have with which treatment. So for things like viruses and bacteria, we have more options. Uh-oh, apparently I'm giving people flashbacks. I'm not sure if that's good.
And you've given your thing about disease. I'm just looking through the posts now.
So yeah, let me just switch over my screen here. Yes, once again, I always have notes. Amazingly enough, I only wrote like 6 pages today for today's talk. I was actually rather lazy. But no, as I was saying, so when we're dealing, as I talked before, the idea of, go ahead. No.
I was going to say, your first thing's posts about the diseases.
Yes.
And the second, trying to find the second one.
Yeah, that one was more dealing with...
More dealing with, well, you go ahead.
How the different environments. Okay, so as I mentioned before, we're dealing with any type of public health in Zootopia. It is a nightmare. You have so many different species. They're going to be infected by different pathogens to different degrees. You can have some, as I mentioned before, like what we were talking about, one of the nastier ones is, of course, more recently, the Ebola outbreak that was going on. And, of course, where do we think it comes from? This isn't something that science has actually figured out fully yet, but the idea is that it might have crossed over from something like a fruit bat. And in that species, of course, it does not cause a hemorrhagic fever. And for those that aren't aware, Ebola, it's a viral disease. There was an outbreak a few years ago that killed several hundred people. Rather bad. It's a nasty virus. It's considered a biosafety level 4 just because when you get a bad one, it basically causes almost every cell in your body to just start to leak. And as a result of this, of course, it's what's called a hemorrhagic fever. So you actually start doing things like sweating blood. It is not a very pleasant way to go. But it's something that, of course, the flying foxes, they don't have that problem. Why? The virus is evolved in order to live with that host so that it can spread itself without killing it. It's only when it jumps over to a species that doesn't quite work the same way. Suddenly you have a big problem. And in Zootopia, this is where you would actually have something along the lines of, as I mentioned before, public health officials would be looking for anything like this. And when we're talking about public health in general, what are the things that they can do? First of all, vaccination. I am definitely of the opinion here that the anti-vax movement in Zootopia probably would be lynched. I am not joking here, because they would represent one of the biggest ways, one of the biggest risks that would exist in their society. And you can't have a group of mammals that are existing within a mixed society like Zootopia that just says, no, we're not going to go that route. Now, obviously, for medical exemptions, that's a difference. But there would not actually be like that whole idea of, I just don't want to vaccinate myself. That would not be a valid excuse. And I could easily see definitely someone either being quarantined for such a reason, or maybe even kicked out of the city. I actually don't know how far they'd be willing to go with it, but just thinking about how one uninoculated individual acting as that bridge species, it could quite literally wipe out a huge swath of the population of a given species at any given time. So this is something where in the past, that's probably happened. Once again, if we consider the tens of thousands of mammalian species that exist in nature, we've only seen a handful of them in the film, mainly just because the animators, of course, don't want to make examples of every species individual. But if you think about it, not all the species that would have existed in the past probably do, and disease would be one of the major reasons why they wouldn't. So it's something that you might want to, once again, this is Disney going dark, but yes. Now, obviously, so what do you do in order to counteract this? As I said, vaccines, huge. The other thing is, of course, a lot more money would go into being able to either track, rapidly design vaccines for this. There would actually probably be a whole system in place that as soon as a new pathogen variant comes up, they are immediately basically cloning that thing and expressing it in something like either avian cells, reptilian cells, something different than a mammal, so that you can then get antigens that can be used for a vaccine. This is the quick and dirty method for vaccine production. It's not as good as some of the more precise ones where you actually take a gene, you cut it out of the pathogen species, you have it expressed in a controlled environment, and then you're able to use that in a purified way that you're not dealing with live virus, or what we refer to as live attenuated virus, which is where you do something to make the virus that doesn't work properly, whether you expose it to radiation, use chemicals in order to break down parts of it, or you just take a small chunk of it. Those are things where you're dealing with parts of a virus that can't work, but it's still starting from a live virus. Those are the ones, and actually that's how most vaccines started. I mean, what I mentioned before, does anybody know where the smallpox vaccine originally came from?
Well, there's two stories. The first was that people in Turkey or China, they'd collect the pus from the pustules and they'd scratch it in. And whoever got it scratched in would develop a fever for a few days. And after that, they'd recover. But the first major vaccine, was it Edward Jenner or? Yeah, it was cowpox, which was very
exactly.
Cows had a very similar disease to smallpox. And milkmaids, they'd catch the disease. Their bodies would fight that disease, and they'd be able to use the same antigens to fight smallpox.
Exactly. And it's something where, once again, smallpox, that was a really interesting case just because smallpox was a virus. It is a DNA-based virus. It doesn't change very much over time, which is why it was so stable. But that was its weakness, because humans were its only natural reservoir. And there was this disease that was close enough that our bodies, if it got that other disease, would recognize smallpox and was able to basically render it neutralized. That's not going to be the case for the vast majority of diseases, but it's something that they will be looking for, so that if something comes around, if a mutation occurs, like what happened with H1N1, when that new flu variant came up and people were going, oh crap, this could be bad, they would actually have in Zootopia probably more resources dedicated to just looking for that type of change and being ready to act on it. Now, of course, go ahead.
I'd also say they'd probably have a much more refined or much shorter testing regime.
Yes.
I remember not long after the Ebola outbreak, there were people talking about a vaccine. The thing is, a lot of these vaccines take several years to use and license.
Yes.
And with one species like us, it probably makes sense, as it's less of a threat, to take the time to make sure you've got the right vaccine first, rather than to rush a half job and continue using that on and on. Whereas in this case, they might think it's much better, even if the vaccine causes some nasty side effects, even if it doesn't work all the time, get something that works half or three quarters or at least most of the time and get it out as soon as possible. Just check that it doesn't kill the person you give it to and then go.
Basically, not only that, but drug discovery in Zootopia would actually be both easier and more difficult at the same time. It's easier to find compounds because you're dealing with a broad variety of species. So you'll be able to find things that work for some species, but not others. The problem, though, is in testing, because what's one of the key things that we do for drug discovery and safety in our world is we use a mammalian analog. We use rats. We use even things like dogs and cats. We also, if it's really important, something like, as I said, in the Ebola case, that was one of the few instances we've really cut down on being able to do this, where non-human primates, so using chimps, monkeys, things like that, those are available as test subjects. That, of course, in Zootopia, those probably wouldn't be allowed. That would be like Dr. Mengele level of just dark, being able to use your own subjects. So what would probably happen is early drug discovery would focus more on what we call preclinical studies. So things like cell cultures, using either avian, reptilian hosts as a way of testing. But when you actually get down to it, they would probably move to clinical trial phases where you actually are testing this on the population way earlier. And I can only hope it's on a volunteer basis, but that is something that you might want to consider. Additionally, one other issue that comes up in Zootopia is when we get into this social aspect of, well, what species do you want to focus on? And from an epidemiology standpoint, of course, you're going to want to focus on the species that make up the largest percentage of the population, which are going to be either your, in the case, probably rodents, as well as some of the herbivorous species. So things like predator classes are probably underrepresented in public dollars. And that's actually, how it would have to work. But we get into things like, okay, now that we've seen the movie that certain species are definitely viewed as lesser individuals, what does that do for them? And for something like that, so for instance, once again, foxes. We were shown in the movie, shifty, not to be trusted. It seems to be a pervasive attitude in the city where, once again, old stereotypes die hard. But when it comes to that, I could honestly see for something like foxes, they would just get, from a public health standpoint, they get lumped in with canines. Just whole hog, the whole thing. They would be lumped in with basically any other canid species, and they wouldn't have a whole bunch of species-specific elements that would be relevant to them, or at least ones that would be part of the general public health output. You would have what would amount to, within the fox species themselves, they might have either an oral tradition or just that they themselves have figured out how to modify, disease treatments or even nutritional treatments for canid species to work for them. And that would be something that will probably occur on the same idea. But I can definitely see an annual vaccination schedule for any disease that's known, as well as anything that, once again, just like with the flu shot. Every year, the CDC in North America, or when you're dealing with over in Australia, over in the UK, they all come together and they figure out what are the bad strains, at least that we think are going to be the bad strains this year. And you try to target them. Some years are going to be good, some years are going to be bad. But it's still something where I could see every year that for individual species or groups, they would have a range of vaccinations that they would be required to have. Just something that would probably be the case. Now, when we're dealing with this different climates, as I mentioned before, that just muddies the water even further because, once again, we're not just mixing species, we're mixing biomes. And that's happening on almost a daily basis. And I mentioned before that we're dealing with an environment where, and this is something that, once again, a common misconception with evolution is people think that evolution leads to the best outcome. It doesn't, because it's all random. The only thing that matters is that it's better than what happened before. And what's better, of course, depends on the environment, it depends on the host. And you could have it where a disease creates a mutation that makes it less virulent in its natural host species, but enables it to infect another species. Then suddenly that opens up a whole new range for it to go and infect. And that's the nightmare scenario, because that type of change can occur at a species level, it can occur at an environment level, and it is even something where it can even occur at a transmission level. So something like a virus suddenly develops a capsule. What we call normally viruses, they can be called either naked or encapsulated. Naked virus is basically just has that protein coat that if you ever seen the pictures of the bacteriophages, the things that look like they kind of have a diamond on their heads, they've got a tail that looks like them. I'll try and find a picture of them as we continue on. Those are what we call naked viruses. They don't have any type of a coating over top of them. Enveloped viruses have a protein coat that surrounds them. It acts as a protective area. It can help protect them against desiccation, against any type of like a hostile environment, whether it be temperature related. And those things can develop and change over time. So you can have a mutation that occurs to change things. That now suddenly that virus is viable in a cold environment, or it's viable in an arid environment. And suddenly then that virus can become just completely entrenched in that area. And they would want to be looking for that almost constantly. And of course, with some viruses, let's face it, we have been fighting for a vaccine for the common cold for who knows how long. But does anyone, once again, this is just a random question. Does anyone have any idea how quickly the cold virus mutates?
Once a month.
It's actually even faster than that. It can actually go through, and because of its life cycle is so rapid, and because the virus the mechanism that it uses in order to replicate itself is actually somewhat error-prone. So what we call the DNA polymerase, the enzyme that actually builds the genome as it's replicating, it actually puts errors into it, and it's evolved to be messy. Why? Because when you're making thousands of virus particles, you don't care if a few of them don't work out. As long as some of them are maintaining the original transcript, you're good. But then all that variation that's produced because of those ones that didn't replicate perfectly, that then opens up the door for natural selection to come in and say, hey, this now opens up a new possibility for me. So as a result, this is something where it's often joked where, particularly in families that have children, is kids come home with a cold, they pass the cold off to the parents. Guess what? The parents can give that cold back to the kid because it's mutated enough that it's actually not recognized by our immune system. So it's one of those situations where we're dealing with anything like that. Oh, and actually we have somebody just basically saying the same cold in 3 different forms. That's exactly the truth. So things like, that is absolutely true, where it is something that you can easily catch the same disease. And that's something like the flu is another one that's very highly variable. The common cold, that's the big one. Also, of course, the other issue with the cold is, in reality, although we all hate it, it's really minor on terms of diseases. So that's why, if we're looking for a disease for a universal vaccine, we're focusing on influenza because that kills people. It's very rare for a common cold to reach that stage. So it is something that it's a priority situation. But yes, it does show that for some viruses, you can make a vaccine and it works really, really well. So this is why things like either tetanus. As I said, now with the chickenpox, once again, parents out there, please consider vaccinating your kids with the chickenpox vaccine. Why? Because shingles sucks later on in life. And but once again, these are things that you can actually target them, and they have a weakness. They have something that, because they're so stable, we can target it. It's an essential protein. It's not going to lose that resistance very easily. But with something like the flu, that thing changes from season to season. Minor changes in the envelope protein suddenly make it, and that's actually something I should point out. Our immune systems, they are adaptive. They will take, they are looking for foreign antigens, and they design antibodies that will match up and will be able to basically bind to those. That then says, okay, we've got a pathogen here. They bind it up, they lock it up. That way it can't infect, and it gets excreted out or just digested by ourselves. Either way, it works. But yeah, this is something where that's not always the case. And it is something that you do have to be incredibly careful about, because if things change, you could suddenly lose everything. And so, well, just going back to this, so the idea is, in Zootopia, we would definitely be looking at trying to get these vaccines onto the market as quickly as possible, watching for those changes that occur so that you can take care of it immediately. And go ahead.
I was going to ask, if, say, a disease from one group of animals jumps to another group, and you've already got a vaccine for that previous group, would you be able to give the new group the vaccine, and it would still, maybe not just as effective, but be mostly as effective?
Exactly. That would be that's actually the first thing that's done in any of these cases, is when you have a new disease that's come up, even if it's within a species, you still try what was done previously, because it's not going to hurt. You are just dealing with injecting antigens into the bloodstream. It's not going to be something that is going to cause additional problems. It's going to be your first line of defense. But once again, just because those vaccines are so specific, and actually, sorry, I went off top of that, but the antibodies, they only work for exactly the antigen that they're looking at. It needs to be so similar in structure. And when we're dealing with antigens, normally these are proteins. And if you think of proteins, they're a string of amino acids that get wrapped up into all these different shapes. And the shape is determined not only by the sequence of the individual amino acids, but also by proteins that help to fold it, things that are called chaperone proteins. So with proteins, you have what is called a primary, secondary, tertiary, and even quaternary structure. Primary is just the sequence of amino acids. That's when the ribosome is coming along on the RNA strand. It just puts together all the amino acids that's being told to by that RNA template. The secondary structure is then just the amino acids that are in that template. Because there's all different charges and polarities that are involved in each of these amino acids, they'll fold themselves up into a particular format. And unfortunately, yeah, I don't have my camera on, but just imagine me waving my arms around and wrapping them around in a circle, things like that. That's what the secondary structure is. Then you have the chaperone proteins that come along and help fold them in a specific way. When you actually look at the antibodies, they are designed to attach to very specific portions of that protein. They match up with it. They know that's what they're looking for. If that changes even slightly, they might not be able to bind to that anymore, which is why when you have these surface markers for the flu virus, when they are changed, suddenly the vaccine, it doesn't work anymore. So this is the same thing that happens there. And once again, when you're dealing with the antibodies, that's why you would try to use the ones that worked previously, but they might not. So at the same time, as I said, you take that virus, you try growing it in any type of cell culture that's not the species you're looking at, so that you get virus, but because it's growing in a different environment, a different host, it tweaks it. It's a little bit different, so those proteins are going to come out just that little bit different, and you hope that you can get that immune response to activate the host, that they can produce antibodies against the pathogen without actually getting the disease. That's the ideal.
I was going to say, we've been talking about diseases and such a lot
sorry.
in terms of biological response between the districts. I was going to say,
Yes.
firstly, on your point that foxes might be seen as shitty and thus not get so much in terms of research spent on them. I've always remembered that the kinds of stereotypes that are being pushed onto foxes throughout this film, and in fact, the comparison to foxes, it's always been very similar to what, well, mainly before World War II, was given to the Jewish population, which is among the richest and one of the most successful minorities across the world. So I think it was looking at the number of Nobel Prizes per 1,000 population.
Yep.
Jewish population is right up there. So before we know, foxes in Zootopia might be some of the richest and most successful out there. And Nick's just bummed he got
short end of the stick there.
Yeah. Anyway, back to the point we were talking about. You mentioned how things such as diseases would act between the larger districts. At the same time, there's the macro scale thing, how individuals would respond between the districts. As some animals, such as bears and squirrels, they hibernate. So would these climate-controlled districts mean they don't hibernate, or would they still hibernate anyway? As in one of my fics, I have a bear waking up from hibernation. At the same time, you've got things such as coat colours. Some animals, particularly Arctic animals, have winter coats. So Arctic foxes, and again, if they stay all their time in Tundra Town, would they stay all white? So, and then you've got deer with antlers. Do they shed them? Would the heat have an effect? Or, if I remember, is it controlled by the sunrise and sunset? So would it carry on regardless?
Yeah, well, it's something where, once again, this is something that's actually a little bit muddy because, of course, there's multiple signals that will cause an animal to, for instance, go into hibernation. A lot of those are environmental ones. So those would be present in Zootopia, if they, particularly where they're staying in something like Tundra Town. But one of the key ones also is resource availability. So if you constantly have, basically, if you were to have a bear that was living in a temperate environment, those environmental cues wouldn't be getting signaled that they should go into hibernation. Additionally, there's no scarcity of food anymore because they could just go to the store. So it might be something where in the short term, and once again, this all depends on how old Zootopia as a mixed society is, because the idea of, once again, having a species that's sentient, going into a torpor for any period of time, you know, some type of a long period of inactivity, when there isn't a scarcity of resources, and when you're dealing with something of an intelligent species, it probably is something that would have been lost fairly early on in development. It would really just depend on anything that's in a more extreme environment. It would have lasted longer. But it's something that not all bear species hibernate, and I actually don't think that many species would. There might be a proclivity towards basically sleeping a lot during colder months.
Because I was going to say that they might be cranky, they might be...
Exactly. It'd be more of a behavioral change than them actually going and becoming, yes, a completely hibernation. And as it really comes down to, because let's face it, hibernation, that's a survival mechanism in order to get around having to scavenge for food during winter. That's the main reason for it. You lower your metabolism down, you build up your stocks so that you basically then just, you sleep through winter. Oh, God, so tempting.
And it might be an option. You might have some mammals decide up with the caffeine, up with some anti-hibernation pills, exercise, and when they set the alarm so they don't sleep in and work through their hibernation, if they're well off or if they're retired, or maybe if it's with young children and babies, they might still hibernate.
Yes, and actually a lot of these smaller mammals as well, particularly some of the rodent species, they might still, because once again, this is something that's, once again, people don't consider, but if you compare metabolisms in animal species, like let's say you actually compare an elephant to a mouse, that mouse has a metabolism rate that on a per weight basis is way higher than the elephant. They burn through so much more energy. So for something like that in particular, that whole idea of food scarcity would be a big trigger. That's actually something that would probably occur, could actually occur in society, where if you're dealing with individuals that aren't getting enough food, having them slip into hibernation might actually be a concern. So once again, that'd be something that the medical professionals would be on the lookout for. Something where if you do have someone that's going through malnutrition, they might very well slip into a hibernative state. And that would actually be, once again, a way of determining what's ailing them, as it were. If you have, they arrive on scene and a mammal's gone into hibernation, that could be a clue as to what's gone wrong. So even these natural behaviors, they could still have some type of an effect that would be there. But once again, yes, and there are ways. We do know that there are ways to bring animals out of hibernation. They don't tend to like it. We have experimented on it, but it's kind of nasty.
As Julius was saying, that time of the year again.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so it's something where that type of idea, it really is a, depending on, it all comes back to, I actually had somebody over on Reddit was asking a similar question, is, how big of an effect would evolution have had on either pathogens or the mammals that are involved? And it really does depend on the time frame, because it does come down to how long has Zootopia been a society for. If we're dealing with something where the original societies got together hundreds of thousands of years ago, then you could actually have evolution being a fairly major source of adapting to this mixed environment. If, however, it's more like a human analog, where things like agriculture and society that we know it really has only existed for like 15,000 years if you're lucky, that's not a lot of time for the hosts, as it were, for the mammals of Zootopia. That's not a lot of time, really, for evolution to take hold. For the pathogens, however, that's an eternity. Once again, we're dealing with the difference between having a life scale that's measured in hours for generational time versus decades. So for the pathogens, they're already a leg up on us because they replicate so quickly, their generational time is so fast, they're able to adapt more quickly than the host can to a new environment. So this is something where it's kind of interesting and a nightmare situation altogether. All right. So let me just go back to my notes here, because yeah, basically now that was pretty much all I had to cover, was just this idea of the differing environments basically create additional opportunities for these individuals to actually come in, for the viruses to be able to grab, or for any type of pathogen to come in and be able to take hold in new environments. So we're dealing with a society where, yeah, we have such a broad range of environments, broad range of species, and that also creates a lot of openings. And if there's one thing that nature abhors, it's a vacuum. Anytime you have available resources that nobody's making use of, guess what? Somebody's gonna eventually. And once they do, they suddenly become the only, they become the only game in town, as it were.
I mean, it's pandas eating bamboo. It's
Yes.
a ludicrous thing for them to eat, but no one else was doing it. There was
Very
also,
much so.
even though they weren't originally carnivores, it was koalas eating eucalyptus, a plant that made it very clear that it doesn't want to be eaten.
It doesn't, exactly. It's something that you're eating, something that will basically kill anything else that tries this. Oh wait, I'm just going to eat nothing but this. And actually, well, with the pandas, of course, I honestly don't know, and I think even scientists aren't exactly sure how pandas evolved, because yes, you take a look at their teeth, much of their digestive system, they're not herbivores. They really should not be, but they are. Yeah, I'm actually just putting up a kind of a neat picture into the general thread right now. This was actually just, we're dealing with basically bacteria evolving. This was done a while ago, a couple of years ago over at MIT. They basically made an absolutely massive Petri plate that had different levels of antibiotic concentration, and then they filmed it over the course of a week. So you actually see bacteria that starts off not being resistant to any type of antibiotic, be able to survive over 1,000 times greater than what would kill it over the course of just a week. And it's actually a really interesting one to see, where you actually get to watch it. So if people are interested, you might want to take a look at that. All right. So that's pretty much all I had for the public health aspect. I guess now we just any questions or anybody else want to chime in for any of this?
Very much.
I'm just going to check the Reddit thread to see if there's been any more. I answered one question on there already.
No, it seems like most people have come here instead.
Exactly. Well, this is good because actually, just answering in text, although it does create a nice permanent record, it's nowhere near as fun.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's just see.
Yeah, it's RVP. I think red pandas are related more to raccoons than.
Yes, they're closer to the procyon, the raccoons, than they are to actual pandas. It's just the physical appearance of them; they look so similar. And let's face it, you see those guys.
As in one of my fics early on, I erroneously mentioned raccoons being a member of the rodents, which isn't true. I fixed that later. But I mean, anteaters, however, their closest relative is the sloth.
Yes.
So,
when you take a look at the tree of life, and actually, once again, just as a funny anecdote, but you want to get a bunch of biologists angry, start talking taxonomy versus basically physical traits versus genetic traits, because wow, at conferences, it has come close to blows that I've seen before. The reason is because, of course, in the past, we would be using this idea of, taxonomic, basically the whole idea of genus and species, and you classified things because they looked similar. They had the same anatomical traits. So for things like animals, you would base things like all the canines that have a similar skull structure, bone structure, limb structure, they would all get grouped together. Well, then came along molecular biology, back starting, of course, in the late 50s, working its way forward to today, where we started sequencing entire genomes. And now, of course, we're learning, oh, wow, those two things are actually completely different. We were completely off. Well, some members of the more traditional biology group, they don't want to change that because it's worked this way for so long. We don't want to change the species name just because we know it. To which people like me, I'm kind of going, yeah, but we know it's different now. We have evidence. So yes. And yes, scientists do argue about this type of stuff constantly. They've taken away some of our fun. We used to be able to name these new species after whatever we wanted, but they started actually cracking down on that.
Mm-hmm. As what was it? It was Arctic foxes were originally classified as different to out of vulpes,
yes,
their own genus or something, and now they're vulpes as they can form hybrids with red foxes.
That's correct. That's actually what prompted them to do it, is the fact that the hybrid between the red fox and the Arctic fox, even though they have different chromosome counts, it's the same idea as what we have with a horse and a donkey for a mule, where they're able to breed, although sometimes those hybrids are actually fertile, so it's not quite as bad as with when you're dealing with things like mules or even things like tigons, those where oftentimes the offspring are not fertile. And I could get into the whole reason for that, but that's way off topic. But yeah, it is something where, exactly, we found out, oops, that's not quite right. These two are actually much more closely related. Let's change it. That's why the Alopex genus, it no longer exists anymore. It's just vulpes.
Well, I was going to say that you mentioned hybrids sometimes being able to have offspring. I know this isn't the case for coy wolves and such, as those are so close they can have viable offspring. But for things like mules, when they rarely have offspring, what happens is, apparently, rather than taking the two different chromosomes and mixing them, they produce sperm and egg with a copy of one of their parents' chromosomes in. So a sperm will have a copy of their father's chromosome in. Or
most of the time, it's the female that works. Yeah, 90% of the time, it's the female that ends up where they can reproduce. But the reason for that is, what we do find, at least with the females, is once again, it's that idea of you just need one egg and one sperm to work out. However, if you have that one egg that worked out, but you have the male, you have millions upon millions of sperm, only a small fraction of them are going to be viable. How many of them are going to make it to the egg? It's a whole lot more difficult for it to do that. And just to explain the reason, it's actually something where it was in the most recent chapter of Lost Causes that I explained why is it that with these hybrids, you can have it where they produce a viable offspring, but the hybrids themselves are infertile, and it has to do with homologous recombination. So when cells divide as part of sexual reproduction, so meiosis, what you end up with is there's a part of that where the chromosomes, they all line up, they find their partner that they match up with, and then they can actually swap big chunks of the DNA between those two copies of the chromosomes. And if you're dealing with the same species, of course, you're dealing with the same book. So let's think of the genome as it's the book, the instruction manual that tells you, I want to build a fill-in-the-blank species. When you're dealing with the same species, by and large, what's written on those pages is damn near identical. The order, go ahead.
So you swap, as what you do is you swap out the section on eye colour. So you take one copy from the mothers, one copy from the fathers. So sorry, my laptop just blacked out a bit.
Okay.
And you do that. Whereas if you've got the hybrids, you might have a page taken from one thing and you don't have a place to put it in the other one.
Or, yeah, exactly. Because what you say, like, let's say that we had in that one section that you're going, you said for eye color, you had something that was also going to help with like some basic part of metabolism for citrate, or you then have another one that's going to regulate bone growth. Well, in the other species, it still has those genes, but they might be in a different part of the chromosome. So when you have that crossover event occurs, it doesn't copy all the genes that it needs. And as a result, there's a big chance that someone's going to get either missing a copy or they might get too many of a copies. And then suddenly that's not viable. So you have to have the absolute perfect array, the perfect range of chance come up where you get all the right genes are present in the cell in the right number in order for it to be fertile.
Mm-hmm. As what you might have at the, not sure if you've planned this or not, but at the Honeywell Centre, you might have a service for hybrids who are infertile but want their own children, where you might scan through their sperm or their eggs to find a viable one and take that and recombine it using IVF, or maybe take a cell from their hand or something and use a cloning procedure, take one of the chromosomes, take it out and put it in. And a side effect of this would be if you say have a hybrid and you take their father's chromosome out, their son or their daughter would genetically also be their father's son or their daughter. So at the same time, they'd be both their son and daughter and their sister or brother.
It all depends on what you use as the base source. And this is actually something where most recently, actually in Science just last month, a group, so this is the idea that the headline was, reproduction without sex. And basically what they've managed to do, and this is only an animal model so far, we haven't moved into humans yet, simply because ethical landmines. But yes, what they managed to do is they take skin cells and they take them back down to, they are able to get them down to stem cells, basically regress them back to stem cells, and then use those in order to produce egg and sperm. So you actually have an egg cell and a sperm cell that came from the same individual. So they're technically reproducing sexually. You're mixing them together again in order to produce an embryo, but it's all from the same individual.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that...
Cloning. Is it cloning, or do you have some recombination? So you have an almost clone.
Exactly. That's it's almost a clone, but it really would be. There might be some recombination that occurs to change things, but because you're all dealing with the same, what they want to do is for couples that are infertile, what this would allow is basically you take the skin cell from the mother, the skin cell from the father, you regress them, you make sperm and egg from them separately, so that you actually still have that combination that occurs. So this would be more for people that are just unable to conceive, whether due to anatomical issues, either low sperm count or something that's going on that they can't possibly conceive normally. This is just another option. But it is something that, in Zootopia, you might very well be dealing with a situation where this type of screening, and that's something that I do in Lost Causes, is of course I mentioned this idea of genetic screening ahead of time, figure out what's broken, and maybe we can fix it. Of course, right now, you're still limited in what you can do. I tried to go realistic, which is why, that story causes a lot of tears. But it's just something where there's limits on how much we can do. And as I said, currently, when we're dealing with what type of genetic modification can we do, we can really only take out or put in small chunks of DNA, like 1 or 2 genes at a time. If you're dealing with a big change, something like we want to engineer a whole organism, that's beyond us, but it is something that's going to be like, I would guess, 30 to 50 years down the road. Sure, we can do it. But it is something that for now, that type of work's there. And also, of course, this will help out with everything else. When we're dealing with either diseases that are working on, as I mentioned, for going into public health, this idea of tracking diseases across the different climates, across all these different environments and species. Well, in the past, it would take us a month in order to even start to do the testing on this type of stuff. In today's labs, provided that you're able to culture and be able to get an isolate of the bacteria, virus, whatever, we can have the entire genome done within a matter of hours, days at the outside. So that just really does speed things up now. And of course, for being able to just very quickly detect if a pathogen's there, a PCR reaction can determine that within 4 hours. PCR is polymerase chain reaction. It's a procedure where you actually go and using basically very specific markers as a starting point, you replicate a small area of the genome, really small, usually less than 1,000 base pairs, but you make a whole bunch of copies of it really fast. And that way you can see if you're looking for a gene of interest for a particular pathogen, something that they have this and nothing else does, you can check to see if it's there and very quickly be able to determine, oh crap, we've got swine flu that's going in here. So we need to be able to now go in, focus our efforts there, get the population aware of it, and make sure that, any species that's vulnerable, they're now wearing masks during the day. They're, just trying to avoid going out to public just until this thing cools down. So that type of alert warning system would definitely be in place.
I was going to say, going back to your thing about taxonomic classification or
binomial nomenclature.
Pardon?
I said binomial nomenclature.
Yeah. In terms of that, it's one of the reasons why one of my favourite creatures are vultures, as you've got the old world vultures and the new world vultures. And genetically, they're completely different, but they've both evolved to fill the same niche.
Yes.
So they look very similar.
Exactly. And it is something, well, once again, and that's what you do find, and it's something we call convergent evolution, where even if you have different species evolving, like if they're in isolated environments, they actually don't interbreed, they don't cross with each other, but their environments are similar, you'll oftentimes find the same adaptations will evolve separately. It might occur in a different way or at a different rate, but for things like, you do see this in birds, for instance, so ones that are have a diet that's particularly, of course, of strong seeds or something like that, of course, the beaks become denser, they usually become a bit shorter, so that they can actually apply more force in order to crack open seeds and the like. And we find that occurs regardless of where it occurs. It's just like where that's an advantage, and it gives a strong evolutionary advantage. And once again, evolution, it's random, but the effect of evolution is not. It's something where natural selection always comes along and is selecting whatever one manages to survive the best. So whoever can better make use of the resources that are available, they're the ones that survive and pass on their genes, and therefore it becomes the more prevalent trait. Sorry, just reading through the chat here. Oh, yes. Oh, wow. I actually hadn't seen some of these earlier concept arts that Red posted here. Oh, nice. Yeah, I know. So, some of the stuff that they did for the
top one looks like mushrooms.
Yeah.
Either that, or if you ever drive through France, they've got a specific design for their walls, which looks like that. Goes up, then fans out. And that's what it reminded me of.
Nice. Let's just see.
I probably have a ton 2 RVP back from when I was researching for Zootop.
All right. But anyways, are there any questions from the chat? Anyone who has just something that they'd like us to cover? I've still got some time here. I do have to run away at 3, so we got a half hour. At least, but please feel free to keep going. I do have to make a couple of runs.
I had one quite a bit earlier. It's mostly about red fox's bone density and how that might affect bipedal adaptation.
Obviously, that is something where, we would have actually had definitely a change would have occurred in something like bone density. Particularly, this is something that there are obvious changes that moving up to that upright gait, we went through in the previous discussions talking about how that actually wasn't the bad one, because there's a huge advantage to be able to look up higher over an environment depending on where you are. So something like, especially anything that would evolve in the savanna or anywhere that there is a lot of plant growth, being able to stand up and to be able to look higher is a huge advantage. But yes, we have to think of, there would definitely be changes in both bone density as well as the structure for the hind limbs, as well as in the pelvic and spine. Those are the key ones that would have to occur. And generally what we would see is denser, stronger bones in the hind limbs, and you would actually have a reduction in the bone density and size with the forelimbs, and in particular, of course, when you start getting down into the carpals. So when you start getting to the hands of the bones of the hand, paw, whatever you want to refer to it as. Because, of course, one of the key elements that makes us successful is the ability to finally manipulate our environment. And that is a big one where for any species that in particular develops tools you find that they develop ways to manipulate the environment at a far greater detail. But of course, what does that require? You need to have smaller, basically less dense bones with better articulation of the joints, as well as the musculature. So you would actually be seeing changes to not only the size and shape of the bones, which we do see in the films. They have actually managed to make things work, although I personally, in the film, I don't like how they have a lot of the species seem to walk in kind of a plantigrade fashion. So basically the toes and the heel are on the ground, as opposed to digitigrade, where they're kind of walking up on just the pads of their feet, as well as the toes. But they do seem to go into that. They transition into that when you see them running. They go into digitigrade where they're up on their toes. So it's just a weird one that I noticed from the film, because I would expect for most species to basically kind of pick one or the other and stick with it for much more of a time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
a lot of people say, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
What were you saying? No, Nobly was speaking.
Yeah.
I was mostly referring to specifically red foxes and how they have a naturally less dense bone structure in their real life equivalent, and how that might affect the
okay, so
in the
specifically.
walk. But
with that
before
one,
we get to that red hat one that a lot of people seem to want to know about is that it's one I'm curious about is newborns, and that the likelihood of, for example, real life example deers being able to walk immediately versus our real world equivalent.
Exactly. That would be something that would be not the case. The simple fact is that what was the reason why, in reality, when we look at evolution over a long term, humans are born prematurely. The reason for that is our heads get too big during development. That is the major concern that they have, and it's one of the biggest ones, is the amount of tissue that's required for our brains, for our cognitive development to exist at that stage. We actually give birth earlier on, and it's not a problem. We've gone away from, this is actually something that's referred to as an R versus K selective advantage, where you can either have a species that produces a whole bunch of young and doesn't devote any attention towards them whatsoever. So they work on R, just reproduction. Lots and lots of young that are produced very quickly, versus K, which is where you have small number of young, but the parents tend to basically dote over them and take good care of them for a long time. Over time, what we found is most societies, most organizations, when they become basically either when they start working in larger and larger groups, you push away from the from the reproductive level to a K. And for us, our neurological development was a major reason for that. And I would definitely imagine that for Zootopia, they would have had something similar, where because there is more of an emphasis where an individual can focus more attention on an individual young for a longer period of time, they would more than likely push towards that, where they're born earlier so that it's easier on the mother to be able to safely give birth. But then also, because they're being cared for so long, you have that period where, you're not going to have it where the cervids, whether you're dealing with any of the hoofed animals, you're not going to be dealing with something where they're born and they're off running within a half hour. That's probably not going to happen, just because, once again, they would have to be in the womb for so long that it becomes both a physiological risk, as well as, let's face it, the longer that you're dealing with a situation where you have basically two individuals living within a single individual, the longer that goes on for, it's a big risk, because if you lose one, you lose both.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something.
I was just going to say, a counterpoint to that could be that with foxes and stuff, all the animals here in Zootopia are shown, largely to be able to go back down onto 4 feet. So you might have is they, rather than crawling like humans do, human babies do on their knees, they crawl on, so they run around on all fours instead of crawling. So maybe the cervids and stuff, they can get back up onto all fours early on, so half an hour or something, as that requires a lot less balance. But they don't transition to going up on 2 feet until later, until the standard time that a human might.
Yeah, and that's actually something that does happen to humans, of course. Humans crawl before they can walk, at least most of them. So it is something that could definitely be the case. And it would depend on, once again, the individual musculature of the species, because another thing is, with human babies, it's not only a fact of, let's face it, when human babies are born, wow, everything in the universe is trying to kill them, including themselves. Where, once again, it's this idea of our newborns are effectively helpless. They don't have even the muscle tone to be able to stand up. Like, they crawl simply because not only is it a balance issue, but their musculature hasn't developed to a point where they can maintain that balance in an upright state. They just don't have the ability to do it at that level. And of course, part of it is human babies have a big head. They are very top heavy. It doesn't help. You need to almost wait for the musculature in order to develop to mature, and then they're able to go in there. So for some species, they would probably be mobile quicker, but I would still definitely give, at least for most of them, a couple of months where they're more than likely in very limited ability to move around. So I wouldn't say, even for the hoof mammals, just because we're once again going to get that idea of you need to be able to get them out there before the head becomes too big to safely pass through the birth canal. So give it a little bit of time where they're effectively useless. However, one thing that would probably be different is, of course, when we take a look at some species like dogs, cats, where when they're born, their eyes aren't open. They're not capable of being open yet because they're not fully formed. That's probably something where, and this is why for lost causes, I basically just said, you know what? I'm just going to tack on an extra 30 or 50% time into the gestation period for these species, simply because that's what we actually see between, for instance, non-human primates and humans, where even though we're very similar from a weight perspective, when you correct it, we keep our young in for longer, and that does help for them to develop.
Mm-hmm. As in my fix, I've had it so that the pregnancy period, the gestation period, is the same as in the wild ones. And in terms of the eyes being closed stuff, you could keep that at 6 days or whatever
Yes.
it is for newborn foxes and stuff, or you could scale it up, assuming that it's similar to humans developing other features. It takes longer for them to open their eyes. There's a whole load of debate around what levels those would be.
Well, no, exactly. This is something where, of course, for humans, of course, our young are able to open their eyes very early, like immediately. But once again, the actual visual acuity that a baby's able to achieve at that early stage is like nothing. Technically, from what from almost everything that I've read, they would almost qualify as legally blind when they're first born, just because, once again, all of the lens, the eye itself, it's new. It hasn't been used. The muscles aren't there. So things like being able to control pupillary contraction or the shape of the lens in order to affect for different focal points, that's not there yet. And that's something that needs to develop.
Mm-hmm. And I was just going to use this to put a point in there. People always say that humans mess up because of the fact that we find our babies ugly, whereas when compared to animal babies, we find them absolutely adorable. The thing is, we're effectively comparing newborn human babies to what are animal young children or toddlers, and young children and toddlers from humans, when they've got their hair growing in and they're up on all twos, those are cute. The real comparison would be between a newborn fox, so a brown thing with no muzzle and all brown fur and closed eyes, compared to a newborn baby, rather than, well, what you would traditionally think of as a newborn fox with red eyes open and going round, as newborn foxes don't look like foxes. Hello?
Hear you. I don't know if do you hear you?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, no, everyone was just being really quiet, I think. Or Eng just muted?
Mm-hmm.
Wonder if that was an accident.
Might be. His things just changed. Eng, are you there? Calling Eng. Anyone home? Ooh. He might have just had a power cut or something. I'm not sure. Oh.
Right. Okay. Sorry. Okay. I think somehow I got disconnected there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Can everybody hear me now? Okay.
Yep. He's alive again.
Yeah. It's bound to happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, Red Velvet Panda, someone said that you had
when did I cut it off?
Oh, bit of lag there.
Yep.
I was going to say, Red Velvet Panda, what's this about you having a cake mascot or something?
I'm a red velvet panda, like a red velvet cake.
Oh, got it.
Panda, yeah. The original character was actually she was supposed to be a cake panda, and I had that as a Tumblr, and that accidentally became my Zootopia Tumblr, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's your character," and I'm like, "Well, I guess it's my character now."
That's great.
Well, I knew the red velvet cake pun. I was thinking, when he said, I was thinking, hang on, is your mascot done an icing on top of a cake or something? Yeah, I had a brain fart, as I knew it was the red velvet cake thing.
Well, the original panda was very red velvet cake colors. So
okay. Well, it's better than mine. I said, like, everyone wonders, where the hell did I get this username from? And the reason is I'm just really lazy. But it was back during 1999. I was playing a play-by-email game of diplomacy. I was England. There you go. And I've just kept it. The reason is nobody ever takes that username anywhere else for some strange reason. So, although weirdly enough, on DeviantArt, apparently I went with Asimite1. I have no idea why. It must have been when I was doing Vampire the Masquerade. Anyways. All right.
My one is based off, it's a reference to J Shute Norway.
Nice.
Who was a person who worked for Vickers, which was a major aircraft well, they actually built airships for England before World War II. And he actually was a lead designer on them. But he was also an author, and he wrote under it was a pen name. He dropped the I think he dropped the Norway from his name. So when he wrote his books, so that his colleagues in the engineering firm wouldn't be able to trace it back to him because he wrote it to damage his reputation.
Nice. All right, just as a note here, so yeah, we're now going to be, I've just had a note. Are there any other questions relating to the climate wall, public health, anything like that? Because otherwise we'll we'll wrap this up officially. I would like to just point out everyone who's here right now, future topics. Ideally, we can get these things done a bit more rapidly. This is also my fault because I've been just completely swamped in the lab. But yes, for the next topic, I'd like to make this thing either every other month type of thing if we can pull that off. But anything that you'd like to add on?
Newborns, babies, growth rates. Yes.
Okay. Babies of Zootopia.
Yeah. Anyways.
So maybe not just babies, but
I'm just
children, things such as childcare, education.
Okay, yeah, that will work. Okay. Also, just from Ian, is there anything else that we want to get from the simulations? And also, if we can make sure that all those images are up there, I'll make sure that they get pinned.
I think it's fair to assume that.
Oh yes, that's one where, and once again, I would imagine that there is going to be some difference. So once again, the biologist in me does realize that yes, we have such a broad range of species. We are going to be looking at where you're going to have some that are going to live longer than others, and on the odds of things, a lot of the larger mammals are going to be a bit longer. But with something like Zootopia, where you have much better health care, the fact that you don't have a situation where 90% of your offspring are going to get either die or eaten within their first year of life, well, you actually take a look at it. So for something like, let's take a red fox, of course. In the wild, their average life expectancy is like 5 to 6 years. But in captivity, they can easily live for 20. And it's something where, once again, and I shouldn't say easily, that's just, but they can live for that long. Same thing with wolves, where just recently I, came across a 21-year-old wolf that's been in a sanctuary for her entire life. So already the natural lifespans of these creatures is much longer than what we give it credit for. And when you add on being in society for such an extended period of time, being able to have access to consistent amounts of food, water, you can actually have the life expectancy extend immensely. I mean, let's just take a look at, the average human life expectancy for the longest time topped out at like 30 years old. But the reason for that... Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say, is that factoring in the very high infant mortality rate, or is it factoring it out? As a lot of people, when talking about the Middle Ages, are saying that once you factored out the infant mortality, the average rate was much higher to 50.
Exactly. That's what I was just going to mention, is the fact that, the average life expectancy, we go back to prehistoric times, average life expectancy was like 16 to 18 years old. But that's because you had, as I said, 90%, 2/3 being generous of the newborns dying very soon or within their first year life. Nobody even made it to adulthood. Once you make it past those points, once you make it to adulthood, then we've seen that life expectancy, it has increased quite a bit, but it's not as extreme a difference as what we see, in the ancient past. And that would be the same thing for Zootopia. So I can definitely see that over time, once again, you wouldn't have species that would be putting so much emphasis on grow quick, reproduce, die. They move away from that. It would move away to something that's more of a decay reproductive strategy. But what I do see is, for instance, you might very well have something like an elephant. They are going to live for longer than, let's say, a squirrel. the squirrel might get up to 50 years old, the elephant might get up to 100 on average. So there's going to be some level of difference there, but it's not going to be as extreme as what we would see in the wild. And a lot of that is that, yeah, most people just die before they reach adulthood. In the, there's a reason why rabbits reproduce like they do, and it's because most of them don't make it.
Mm-hmm. As you go on with healthcare,
oh yes,
back in the 40s, 50s, healthcare was mainly there, as well as births, to give out medicine, which stopped a lot of preventable diseases, and that probably extended the lifespan by 10 years. Then there was fixing broken bones and things like that, extended it by 10 years. And now, then, when it was heart attacks and strokes, that raised the average by 5 to 6 years. So as we go on, we keep on hitting new roadblocks and working through them, but each time the gains seem to be getting less.
Yes, well, exactly. It's something where we are reaching the limit where until we get something that can basically fix what amounts to disease on a cellular level, yeah, we're going to be maxed out for years. There's a whole idea of transhumanism, this thing. But the fact is that our cells reproduce, and every time a cell reproduces, you get errors in there. It corrects as many of them as it can, but let's face it, what is cancer? It's cells behaving badly. That's really it. And unfortunately, it's something where until we can fix on an individual cell basis, we're not going to be able to do that. Eventually, things just wear down. It sucks, but it's true. And in something like Zootopia, that environment where, yes, you're definitely looking at a situation where I would say that the life expectancies are going to be much greater. For some species, they might not be as good as humans. Some of them are going to be way better than humans. But it's definitely not going to be the, yes, you've got 2 years to get your entire life done, go. And then you're out. Yeah, actually, and very good point. And yeah, with reptiles, let's face it, yeah, some of those are crazy. However, plants still win. The oldest living organism on this planet is a plant. There's actually a couple of examples of them where one is actually really interesting. It's a entire forest that is a genetic clone of itself. They reproduce through suckers, and it covers a couple of 100 acres, I want to say. So I think that's one of the biggest ones. But there might actually be a fungal mat that is the largest individual creature. I'd have to take a look at that. And once again, one of the reasons why, so does anybody have an idea why turtles live so long?
I was just going to say, back to the mushroom thing, it's I am Legion for we are mushrooms.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, and also it's metabolism. You take a look at reptiles, by and large, their metabolic rates are way, way lower. So you're dealing with, when you have lower metabolic rates, you're dealing with lower cell division rates. What that does mean is, if anyone's ever had something like a tortoise or any type of one of those larger reptiles, if they get injured, it takes them a long time to heal. And that's actually a side effect, where as long as everything's good, you're not injured, you've got food, they can just maintain. They are great at coasting. When things change, that's where it becomes a bad thing. I mean, once again, the reason why mammals became so, why mammals succeeded was only because the big predators of the time, 65 million years ago, got wiped out because they couldn't adapt. But mammals, with their high reproductive rates, their ability to very quickly fill in those natural niches and clades in the environment, you suddenly had a species that was able to take advantage of basically the weakness of the other species. And that's been the case as we've gone on. And then humans came along, decided, hey, we're just going to just kind of wipe out entire species on our own. We got this.
I think my favorite one, it was the giant armadillos, which were kill them and use their shells as tents.
Yep. It was one, hey, you got something we can use. Unfortunately, it was that whole thing of, in the future, maybe not kill them all. But yeah, that is definitely something to consider. And it's true, is that we take a look and, yeah, really, it is survival of the fittest. Whatever can manage to survive will fill in. And let me put it this way. As I said, if by our actions or the actions of another species, a vacuum is created in nature, something will fill in that place. The odds are it'll first be something, unicellular, will take advantage of it, and then something will take advantage of that, and on top of that, and on top of that. Eventually, it will fill in, it will make use of it, whether or not we're here.
As I'm not sure if you've seen it, but there was an interesting documentary following the Mount St. Helens eruption.
Of course.
Looking at the colonizers going back on to the moonscape and colonizing it, and it was marmots or groundhogs or something.
Yep.
Which actually survived the eruption and were emerging very quickly afterwards, and they were almost the first colonizers of this new.
Yeah, new area, absolutely. All right. Should I see anything else here? Actually, that's actually something interesting. Well, Julius just actually came up with an idea for immigration control. And this is one thing where, of course, one of the annoying things about Zootopia is that it was focused on Zootopia. Because there are questions about the broader society, the world in general. And that would really be interesting to look at, just how this would work. Because, of course, having a cultural melting pot like Zootopia, that's almost like the end goal. But you would only imagine from a historical basis that they would have had more species, or at least kind groupings, that would have worked together initially. So how long ago that would be, and yeah, as Zootopia just, or Julius just put in, it's kind of, yeah, Zootopia is basically all that's there. The rest of it is kind of just a post-apocalyptic wasteland.
Mm-hmm.
So it all depends. But no, as I said, there's a reason why I like working in this environment, because it's got such an interesting slate to work with and just throw things against the wall. Is it realistic? A little questionable. We try to play this as close as we can to what would actually work out, but that's also part of the fun. And that was why, I mean, in one of the discussions, we had somebody jump in who was just so against this whole idea. And it's kind of, really, we're having fun. Does that matter? Mm-hmm. But anyways, so as I said, all of the previous Reddit chats I've pinned to the top here. And if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to just drop me a line. I'm on Reddit, same username. I'm also on the various Discord servers. I'd like to very much thank J Shute Norway as well as Ian Hunter for their help here. Are there any questions before we head off? Any other topics?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
No, don't think so.
All right. So now once again, we've had a request for the next topic to be basically babies, young, and that type of stuff. I'll see if I can work something out for there.
Children and education.
Yes.
Education as well.
Nice. All right. So anyways, I think that's going to be it. I'd like, once again, thank you everybody for showing up. This one was a larger group. I think next time I'll try and get some more questions to get the audience to try and answer, rather than just either me or the others just talking over them. Unfortunately, there was a joke yesterday that apparently I've got a good voice, so people want to hear me talk. I don't know where that came from, but yeah. Needless to say, we're having discussion than a lecture, which is why this has been really good. And thank you everyone for being involved. And one last call. Any questions?
Mm-hmm.
No? All right. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope everyone has a good weekend. And thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.